Hey guys, tonight we're taking a quiet little walk through medieval times. Not through the castles and wars you usually hear about, but down a more peculiar, slightly foggy path. One where ale flows like water, herbs hum strange lullabies, and the line between spiritual enlightenment and just being kind of high gets very, very blurry. That's right, we're diving into the weird, sleepy, and mostly overlooked world of how people got a little sideways in the Middle Ages. And spoiler, you probably won't survive this era unless you're already immune to spoiled bread, religious fervour, and deeply questionable medicines. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments, what city are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start off somewhere dusty, hay-scented, and vaguely damp. You're not in a castle, you're not even in a village square. You're in a low-ceilinged room, with smoky rafters and a bench that smells like every generation of your family has spilled something on it. Welcome to the medieval tavern, your favourite nightly escape from the crushing monotony of serfdom. This is where the real magic happens, not with spells, but with barley. You drink ale, not because it's fun, but because water might kill you, literally. It's full of stuff that makes you sick, so fermented beverages are the safer bet. But that doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. Ale's warm, bitter, and just strong enough to make the evening slip by with a nice fuzz around the edges. Mead, if you're lucky, is a touch sweeter, honey-based and heady. These are your daily medicines, your social glue, and your best shot at taking the edge off after 10 hours of threshing grain or mucking out stables. And here's the thing, everyone drinks, kids drink, pregnant women drink, monks drink, nobles drink. There's no drinking age, no morning after guilt, and no bar tab, just the communal mug being passed around with equal parts thirst and resignation. The vibe? Think sleepy pub, but with more mud and fewer songs. Or more songs, depending on the ale flow. You listen to stories about a guy who maybe saw a dragon once, and a woman whose cow gave birth to twins, an omen surely. The fire crackles, someone belches, someone else argues about saints. You're not buzzed exactly, you're softened, like your brain's wearing a wool cloak. But here's the historical nugget that most people forget. For much of medieval Europe, ale wasn't just a drink. It was a survival tool. Called small beer, or small ale, the stuff was often brewed weak enough for daily hydration, but still had enough alcohol to kill off harmful bacteria. The process of boiling and fermenting made it cleaner than most water sources. Even monks wrote out beer recipes and raved, quietly of course, about their favourite brews in monastery margins. And speaking of margins, here's a strange little fact that doesn't get enough love. In some towns, women were the primary brewers. They were called alewives, and their brewing symbols, like a broom hung above the door, were so recognisable that they may have helped shape later imagery of witches. Yep, brewing, brooms, pointy hats. It's all starting to look familiar, isn't it? Now let's talk about that open scholarly debate. The one that makes modern historians cock an eyebrow at all this drinking. How drunk were they really? Some argue that the alcohol content was low enough that even children could sip ale all day without wobbling into a sheep pen. Others suggest that after a few mugs of even low-strength stuff, especially on an empty stomach, you definitely feel it. And when you mix that with fasting, bad food, or an unexpected batch that fermented a little too well, let's just say things got wobbly. But remember, you're not drinking to escape. You're drinking because this is what you do. It's as woven into your routine as candle making or scratching at fleas. There's no judgment here. No one's tallying your tankards. And somewhere deep in your belly, the warmth of the mead curls like a little dragon settling in for sleep. Outside, the night rolls over the hills, cool and hushed. Inside, the glow of the hearth flickers against wooden beams, casting long shadows. You sit, hands wrapped around your mug, and feel time slow down, not because you're enlightened, but because there's literally nothing else to do after sunset. except maybe sing a song about a goose, or fall asleep where you're sitting. And if you're lucky, the ale is fresh, not sour. If you're really lucky, it's strong. If you're too lucky, well, you might see a vision of St. Cuthbert juggling turnips. Either way, you're easing out of your mind the old-fashioned way, one mug at a time. You're waking up, if you can call it that, on a rough pallet of straw. Your mouth feels like it hosted a travelling theatre troupe overnight, and your head hums with the dull buzz of too much mead and too little clean water. You sit up slowly, careful not to jostle your brain too much. There's sunlight spilling through a cracked shutter, dust dancing lazily in the beams, and somewhere a rooster is yelling at the universe. Again. But instead of trudging back out to the fields just yet, we're taking a little detour to a place that smells like parchment and boiled cabbage, and echoes with the gentle rustle of robes. Yep, it's time to pay a visit to the monastery. Because while the peasants were clinking tankards and falling asleep face first into barley stew, the monks, they were quietly vibing. Now don't get it twisted. Monks weren't out here throwing medieval rages. Their lives were ruled by silence, bells, and an exhausting schedule of prayer and manual labour. But tucked between those pious hours, they found time for something sacred. Brewing. That's right. Monks were some of the most accomplished beer makers in medieval Europe, and not just because they liked to buzz, although, let's be real, it didn't hurt. Brewing was a way to sustain the community, support travellers, and most importantly ensure the water they drank wouldn't murder them from the inside. The monastery brewery was a calm, earthy place, with stone floors, copper kettles, and the rich smell of yeast and damp wood. You watch as a monk, let's call him Brother Edric, lifts the lid on a bubbling vat. Steam curls up, fragrant with herbs and grain. His face is pink from the heat, his robe damp at the armpits. He looks, honestly, pretty content. Their beer was better than yours. Stronger, cleaner, and sometimes even flavoured with spices or honey. They had the resources, the knowledge, and the time to refine their process. It was also tax exempt. That's right. Monks got to brew and sell beer without paying the usual fees, which made them not just holy men, but also savvy entrepreneurs in the fermented beverage game. Here's your historical fact for the evening. Some of the most famous European beer traditions, like those in Belgium and Germany, can trace their origins back to medieval monastic brewing. These weren't just one-off experiments. Some of these brews were passed down, refined, and are still sold today. So, if you've ever sipped a Trappist ale and thought, this tastes like something an ancient bearded man prayed over, you're not wrong. But now comes the odd bit. Did you know monks were also pioneers in early hangover cures? After all, drinking even holy beer could lead to some unholy mornings. They had all sorts of remedies, infusions of bitter herbs, cold river baths, or a strict day of fasting and prayer to cleanse the spirit and the gut. One popular treatment, chewing fennel seeds and drinking vinegar water. Whether it worked is another matter. There's also a curious little scholarly rabbit hole we can't ignore. Just how sober were the monks, really? Officially, they weren't supposed to drink to excess. Moderation was key, as dictated by the rule of St. Benedict. But the definition of moderation was a little flexible. Some interpretations allowed for a full litre of beer per monk per day. Others pushed it even higher, especially if you included medicinal use. So, were they spiritually devoted or just buzzed enough to make copying Latin texts bearable? Historians debate this with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for Game of Thrones theories. You sit now in the cloister garden, where mint and lavender grow wild among gravel paths. Brother Edric passes you a cup of dark, strong ale and offers a quiet nod before returning to his duties. You sip it slowly, letting the taste bloom. Nutty, herbal, a little sharp. The breeze carries a mix of incense and sheep. A bell tolls in the distance, calling the monks to none, or maybe terse. You've lost track, and honestly, you don't mind. Time bends here. This is a high of a different kind. It's not rowdy or raucous. It's subtle, meditative. Your body is at rest. Your mind is heavy-lidded but light-footed, drifting somewhere between prayer and daydream. The monks might not say they're chasing transcendence through ale, but the line between the sacred and the sensory is thinner than they'd admit. And maybe that's the strange truth of it. In a world so full of suffering, labour and religious fear, even a mild, blessed buzz could feel like a little piece of heaven. You're outside now, walking along a narrow rutted path that winds through a quiet stretch of the medieval countryside. There's a low mist hugging the ground, and the trees bend ever so slightly toward each other, as if sharing secrets you're not supposed to hear. It smells like damp earth, moss, and something else, something sharper. Sweet, but in a dark, rooty way. You don't recognize it at first, but then you look down, and there it is, growing in clusters under the hedgerow. Mandrake, or what's left of it. This isn't your average root. No, this little guy has a reputation. In fact, if you were a medieval herbalist, or a very nervous priest, you'd know that mandrake has a shape suspiciously like a human body. People whispered that it screamed when uprooted, that its cry could kill a man on the spot, which makes harvesting it kind of a bold move. But the risk, they thought, was worth it. Because this was no ordinary plant. This was a key to visions, to prophecy, to the realms just beyond waking. And in the wrong hands, it could be a one-way ticket to never waking up at all. You're not alone on the path. A woman in a heavy cloak, face shadowed by her hood, kneels by the roots and carefully digs, murmuring something under her breath. Not Latin, not quite English. A local dialect, thick and old. She's got belladonna leaves tucked into her satchel and a string of dried henbane pods around her neck. Is she a healer, a wise woman, or a witch, depending on who's asking? In medieval Europe, those titles often overlapped and none of them were safe. Now let's talk history for a second. Mandrake, belladonna, henbane. These weren't fringe curiosities. These were central players in the early apothecary game. People believed they could numb pain, induce sleep, or open the gates to visions and dreams. Used in the right doses, they were medicine. Used recklessly, or intentionally, they could trigger hallucinations, delirium, even death. But for those desperate to see beyond the veil of the physical world, that risk wasn't a deterrent. It was part of the price. And here's your historical fact of the night. Belladonna, also called deadly nightshade, got its name from Italian women who used small drops of it to dilate their pupils, thinking it made them look more alluring. But in the Middle Ages, it wasn't about fashion. It was a way to slip between worlds. Some used it to quiet their bodies, slow the heart, and induce strange waking dreams. You can almost imagine the feeling, floating just above your skin, time stretching out like warm honey, reality peeling away in soft, flickering layers. Now, for the odd fringe fact, there were recipes, actual recipes for what we'd now call getting high. Herbal manuals written in Latin or rough vernacular included doses and preparation methods. A typical potion might include a base of wine or animal fat mixed with chopped mandrake, belladonna and opium poppy. You didn't drink it. Oh no, that would be too quick. You applied it to the skin, particularly in warm, thin areas like under the arms, or other places we won't get into too specifically here, but just know the delivery methods were, intimate. This brings us to one of the eerier scholarly debates. Did medieval witches actually experience flight, or was it all just one long drugged hallucination? Some records describe women claiming to fly to sabbats, dance with demons, or speak with spirits. Were these confessions extracted under torture, or the vivid dreams of someone deep under the influence of these plants? No one's completely sure. Some scholars argue that the ingredients in witches' ointments had all the right compounds to cause intense sensory hallucinations. Others say the idea of flying was symbolic, about spiritual ecstasy, not literal broomstick joyrides. But tonight, under the pale branches, you crouch beside the cloaked woman. She doesn't speak to you, but she places a small root in your hand. It's twisted, vaguely human-shaped, and cold to the touch. You feel a hum in your fingertips, imagined, probably. but you're not entirely certain. The woods seem quieter now, or louder, in a different way. The wind rustles high above and every sound feels close. Your breath, the crackle of twigs, the pulsing of blood in your ears. A thin fog rolls across your path, and for a moment, just a moment, you feel weightless. Not light like laughter, light like smoke, and then it's gone. The woman is gone too, and you're left with the root still in your palm. You tuck it away and walk on, heart beating a little faster, not from fear, just awareness. The forest feels awake in a way you hadn't noticed before, alive and watching. And you realise that here, in the darker edges of the medieval world, medicine and magic aren't really separate. They're different names for the same strange current running under the soil. It's not about rebellion. It's not even about fun. It's about escape, yes, but also control, about reaching into something bigger, older, weirder than the waking world allows. And in a world so full of suffering, maybe that flicker of otherworldly experience, earned through roots, herbs, and whispered prayers, was the closest thing to peace. You find yourself by a hearth again, only this time it isn't the dim warmth of a peasant's cottage or the disciplined quiet of a monastery. No, this room hums differently, lower, richer, like something is waiting just out of view. The shadows move a little too easily here, and there's a thick resinous smell hanging in the air. Wax, herbs, something faintly sweet and a little smoky. You're in the home of a midwife, or maybe an herbalist, or maybe a woman who the church would rather not name at all. She's mixing something in a clay bowl, muttering as she works. Fat and herbs, petals and roots. There's a mortar and pestle working rhythmically in her hands, and every few minutes she dips her fingers into the mixture and spreads it across a strip of cloth. This is no stew. This is an ointment, a salve, and it's not for your knees. This, dear traveller, is flying ointment. Now, before you get excited about airborne adventures, let's be clear. No one was actually flying, not in the literal broomstick across the moon sense. But in the Middle Ages, people didn't separate physical experience from spiritual the way we do now. Visions were real, dreams were messages, and this stuff, this slick, pungent salve, was the key to slipping into that other state of being, the liminal space where witches danced with horned gods and the rules of gravity no longer applied. Let's get into the facts. Historically speaking, flying ointment was a real term used in inquisitorial documents and medical treatises alike. Recipes varied, but most included psychoactive herbs like belladonna, henbane, mandrake, and datura, all of which contain tropane alkaloids that, when absorbed through the skin, can induce vivid hallucinations, time distortion, and a dreamlike sense of disembodiment. Not ideal for party games, but perfect if you're looking to commune with spirits or visit the devil's midnight meeting in the woods. The application was key. You couldn't just eat this stuff, it would kill you fast and painfully. But rubbed on the skin, especially the soft, warm places where absorption was strongest, well, then it became something else, something potent. And if you're wondering how exactly that worked, let's just say there's a reason broomsticks became part of the popular imagery. Let your imagination fill in the gaps. Or don't. Either way, it's weird. Here's your quirky fact for the night. Some witches reportedly experience sensations of floating, spinning, or flying after using the ointment. Not metaphorically, actually lifting off the ground. Or at least, that's how it felt to them. There are court records where women, often under duress, described flying to sabbats on the backs of animals, or feeling their souls leave their bodies. Whether they believed it before or after the Inquisition got involved is up for debate, but the stories had a strange consistency. Which brings us to the scholarly wrestling match. Were these experiences real in any meaningful way? Not physically, sure, but psychologically, spiritually? Some anthropologists argue that these visions were part of a shamanic tradition, an indigenous European form of spiritual practice, repressed and distorted by later Christian authorities. Others believe it was simply pharmacology meets fear. Poor, marginalised women using plant medicine to escape trauma or pain, and the authorities twisting those moments into heresy. And still others, more sceptical, think it was just mass hysteria. Hallucinations fueled by bad bread, bad nerves, and too much incense. But none of that matters right now, because you're watching the woman finish her concoction. She spreads it along a narrow wooden rod, her fingers moving with practiced care. She doesn't speak, but there's an unspoken invitation. You reach out, because of course you do, and press 2 fingers into the ointment. It's warm, almost alive. You rub it gently onto your wrist. The effect isn't immediate. At first nothing changes. The fire crackles. The dog whines outside. The woman hums softly to herself as she cleans her tools. And then the walls bend. Not violently, not in a horror movie way, more like fabric caught in the breeze. Your body feels simultaneously heavy and weightless, like someone is pressing you into the floor while another version of you floats gently up, drifting toward the low wooden ceiling. There's a fluttering in your chest, not fear, but something else. Anticipation, wonder. You close your eyes. The room is gone. You're outside or above it, or somewhere in between. Trees stretch below you like charcoal lines on a page. There's a river of stars above, and it's so quiet. The kind of silence that makes you realize how loud your thoughts usually are. Shapes flicker at the edge of your vision. Are those people? Spirits? Just the imagination unbound? You can't tell. You don't care. You're floating. The ointment does its work, and for a brief moment you understand why someone would risk the gallows for this. Not for power, not for rebellion, but because this is the only place where pain doesn't follow, where hunger is just a memory and grief can't reach. Up here, in the air that may not even exist, there's peace, or something close to it. And then, slowly, the world returns. The floating eases. The warmth fades. The room reassembles itself around you. Timbers and firelight, and the woman watching you quietly, as if she's done this 100 times before. Maybe she has. You don't speak, you don't need to. But as you leave, you notice something strange. Your feet are dirty, like you've been walking through the woods barefoot. You don't remember it, but you don't doubt it either. You're walking now far from the village, where the land stretches open and lazy, dotted with sheep and the occasional distant figure hunched in the fields. You pass rows of low green plants swaying gently in the breeze, nothing that would catch your eye at first glance. But someone leans over one of them with care, fingers brushing the long narrow leaves and tugging gently at the fibrous stalks. You're looking at hemp. Ordinary, common, almost boring, but not really. Because hemp, this scruffy, hard-working little plant, was kind of a big deal in medieval times, long before modern hashtags and edibles got involved. This wasn't the tightly regulated THC-measured variety we argue about today. It was a plant of many faces: rope, fabric, oil, and yes, sometimes a buzz, even if that part wasn't exactly the public selling point. You crouch beside a farmer, his hands are thick with calluses, his back hunched from years of repetition. He's not growing hemp to smoke it, though. Not intentionally, anyway. He's harvesting it to twist into rope, to weave into coarse cloth, to make sails and fishing nets. Hemp was, for all intents and purposes, the duct tape of the medieval world. Durable, cheap, and endlessly useful. But here's where it gets interesting. Somewhere along the line, someone figured out that certain parts of the plant had other effects. Subtler than mandrake or belladonna, sure, but real. If you dried the flowers, crushed the leaves, steeped them in oil, or mixed them into wine, you got something different. Something relaxing. Mellow. Like the world got a little softer at the edges. Not a full-on spiritual launch into the astral plane, but enough to turn down the noise inside your skull. Historical fact time. Hemp was widely cultivated across medieval Europe and Asia. While most of it was low in psychoactive compounds, there were pockets, especially in warmer regions. where wild or semi-domesticated varieties carried more kick. And in places like India, Persia, and the Islamic Golden Age territories, hashish and cannabis preparations were well known and used medicinally and recreationally. These traditions made their way into Europe via trade routes, crusaders and travellers who came home with more than just stolen relics and sunburns. And here's the twist: not everyone saw it as harmless. Some religious authorities, particularly those influenced by stricter interpretations of Christian doctrine, were suspicious of anything that dulled the senses or altered the mind. If God wanted you clear-headed, they reasoned, why would you cloud your thoughts with herbs of confusion? But that didn't stop people, especially when pain, fear, and general existential dread were part of daily life. Now here's your quirky fringe fact. In some regions, hemp seeds were fed to livestock to calm them down. But there's evidence that people sometimes nibbled on them too, either raw or roasted, and while the seeds themselves contain little to no THC, the plant oils they carried could hold residual psychoactive compounds. Imagine chewing a handful of seeds and slowly realizing you feel better. Not great. Just less anxious about your toothache or the next tax levy. There's also a curious scholarly debate about the extent to which medieval people actually used hemp to get high. Most of the written records focus on practical applications: rope, clothing, paper. But some early medical texts list cannabis among their healing tools, especially for treating inflammation, insomnia, and what they called melancholy of the womb, a catch-all diagnosis that today would probably translate to everything from depression to cramps. The line between medicine and recreation was razor thin. So now you're back in the field, standing next to this farmer who likely doesn't care one bit about psychoactive potential. He's thinking about trade, taxes, and whether the weather will hold through the week. But further down the road, in a dusty apothecary's cupboard, a few dried leaves might be waiting for someone who knows how to use them a little differently. You picture that someone now, maybe a tired mother who can't sleep, maybe an old soldier with pain in his bones, maybe a travelling friar who picked up more than just relics on his journey east. A pinch of crushed leaf stirred into warm wine, a balm rubbed on the temples. Nothing flashy, just easier breathing, softer thoughts, a rare moment of calm. It's not the stuff of legends or midnight broomstick rides, but it's real. And in a time when life was mostly suffering sandwiched between more suffering, that kind of relief, however small, could feel like a miracle. You wander further, brushing your hand along the tall stalks as you pass. The wind smells like green things and sun-warmed earth. There's a stillness here, not sacred exactly, but old, honest. You can see why someone would stay in this field a little longer than necessary, why they'd breathe a little deeper. Maybe even close their eyes and let the world blur for a while. And isn't that its own kind of high? The kind that doesn't need trances or visions or devils at the crossroads. Just a moment of silence, of space, of stillness in a time when stillness was rare and precious. You open your eyes, the field remains, you're indoors again, though the air here is thick, almost syrupy, with a heavy scent of something floral and strange. Not the bright, cheerful flowers from gardens or church garlands, but something darker, sleepier, the smell of dreams being coaxed from the edge of consciousness. You're standing in the corner of a physician's workroom, or at least someone who claims to be a physician. He's hunched over a table littered with dried herbs, worn-out scrolls and odd little vials. His hands move with the confidence of someone who's had just enough success to ignore the screams. Tonight's lesson? Pain management, medieval style, and trust me, you're going to want to take notes, especially if you've recently stepped on a rusty nail, had a limb crushed by a cartwheel, or caught the plague. Because this is the era before anaesthesia, before ibuprofen, before you could even scream ouch without someone handing you a prayer and a cup of wine. But if you were lucky, and that's doing a lot of heavy lifting here, you might be given a compound containing the dried latex of a poppy pod. Yes, poppies. Bright red fields of them, waving innocently in the breeze, hiding their powerful secret. The same plants that would one day launch global trade routes and brutal wars were already known in the Middle Ages for their ability to kill pain and quiet the soul. The opium poppy, Papaver somniferum, had been used for centuries across the ancient world, and medieval healers hadn't forgotten its promise. The physician before you reaches for a jar. Inside is a thick brownish lump, crumbled and dry but potent. He crushes a bit of it into a spoon, then stirs it into a dark syrup made of wine and herbs. He's preparing a remedy called laudanum, an early version, rough and inconsistent but effective. He'll give it to a patient with a fever or a wound or nerves so frayed they can no longer sleep, and it might help. It might also slow their breathing, cloud their thoughts, and send them into a haze they'll never fully emerge from. Here's your historical fact for the night. Opium was widely known and used in medieval Islamic medicine, and gradually made its way into European texts through translated Arabic manuscripts. Medical thinkers like Avicenna described its properties in great detail, and by the 12th century it had become part of the European pharmacopoeia, even if its use was often cloaked in vague language. Nobody wanted to admit they were relying on a substance that could kill and cure in equal measure. And here's the fringe fact, because you knew this was coming. Plague doctors, those beaked mysterious figures you've seen in every Halloween costume catalogue, were known to stuff their masks with aromatic herbs and sometimes, yes, opium-infused compounds. Not because it cured anything, but because the air was believed to carry disease, and sweet-smelling substances were thought to purify it. In reality, the opium might have just helped them stay calm while walking through streets lined with the dying. Not heroic exactly, but relatable. Now for the debate. How widely was opium used, really? Some scholars argue that it was relatively rare, expensive, hard to store, and risky to use without precise knowledge. Others believe it was quietly essential, passed hand to hand among healers, midwives, and battlefield medics who knew its value even if they didn't always write it down. It's hard to know for sure, but consider this. When nothing else could dull the pain, and prayer wasn't cutting it, a pinch of poppy could feel like mercy itself. You're still in the room. The physician leans back, the shadows under his eyes darker than any ink on his scrolls. He's been up for hours, maybe days, tending to patients who have no hope of healing. And this mixture, this clumsy brown syrup, is all he has left to offer. He doesn't see himself as a dealer in dreams, just a man trying to hold back the tide of agony a little longer. You look around. The air wavers slightly, whether from candle smoke or something stronger you can't tell. There's a patient in the corner, breathing in slow, ragged rhythms. Their eyes flutter open, glazed, but peaceful. Maybe the remedy helped. Maybe it just made them forget. Either way, the room is quiet now. You sit beside the window. Outside, the moon hangs low and full, watching this scene unfold with the kind of ancient disinterest only celestial bodies can manage. You try to imagine a world where pain was just part of life, inescapable, constant, and everywhere. But here, in this tiny circle of flickering light and crumbling scrolls, someone tried to fight back, not with swords or scripture, but with a flower, and that counts for something. You glance at the poppy pod on the table, its surface dry and ridged like an old coin, small, unassuming, but within it the power to send a soul sailing away from pain, if only for a little while. You're in a chapel now, not one of those towering cathedrals with stained glass windows and choirs in velvet, but something smaller, quieter. Humble stone walls, worn wooden benches, a few flickering candles guttering in iron holders. The air smells like incense, melted wax, and the faint copper tang of old blood, perhaps from relics, perhaps from something less symbolic. You're not here to pray, exactly. You're here to witness something stranger. Because in this place, the high doesn't come from roots or herbs or fermented brews. It comes from within, or maybe from above. Depends who you ask. A nun kneels near the altar, hands clasped tightly, shoulders trembling not with sorrow but with something deeper, more electric. Her face is turned upward, eyes wide open though unfocused, lips moving with barely audible urgency. She's not speaking, she's pleading, or maybe receiving. Her cheeks are wet, but she isn't crying. She's in a trance. This is religious ecstasy, one of the strangest and most culturally sanctioned ways to get high in the medieval world. No potions, no powders, no ointments smeared in secret, just prayer, fasting, deprivation, days, sometimes weeks without food or sleep, paired with endless repetition of sacred words, and suddenly the ceiling splits open and the divine pours in. Or at least that's how they described it. You sit back in the shadows of the chapel trying to decide if it's real or performative, and then you hear her speak, not loudly, not in a voice meant for ears, but in a way that cuts straight through the air like a blade through cloth. Her words make no sense, not to you, not in any language you recognize. Her body rocks slightly. She smiles, then gasps, then shudders. Someone nearby crosses themselves. Another bows their head. This is no play. This is rapture. Historical fact time. Religious visions were not uncommon in the Middle Ages, particularly among women in monastic orders. Saints like Hildegard of Bingen, Catherine of Siena, and Teresa of Avila all wrote of intense, often sensual experiences with the divine. These were sometimes visual, seeing angels, Christ, or the Virgin Mary, and sometimes physical, described as a burning in the chest, a lightness in the body, or even a feeling of being lifted into the air. But here's the thing, they weren't always seen as holy. Depending on who was in charge, visions could be celebrated as divine gifts, or condemned as heretical illusions, especially when they came from women. Church authorities were suspicious, worried that too much personal revelation could challenge official doctrine. Was this the Holy Spirit, or just hysteria? Now for your fringe fact. There are records of saints and mystics whose visions seemed a lot like drug trips, bright lights, disembodied voices, conversations with beings made of light or flame. Some scholars now wonder whether these episodes were neurological, perhaps the result of starvation, epilepsy, or even ergot poisoning. You remember that fun little mole, don't you? Others think some of these mystics may have used mild psychoactive herbs, knowingly or not. After all, monasteries and convents had access to extensive gardens and medical knowledge. Who's to say a calming tea didn't do more than calm? And here's your debate. Were these visions purely spiritual, or were they the body breaking down under intense pressure? Mystics often deprived themselves of food, sleep and comfort for weeks at a time. They whipped themselves, walked barefoot through snow and refused to speak for years. In modern terms, we'd call this extreme asceticism. But back then, it was devotion. The body was a barrier to the soul, and the more you punished it, the more you could hear the whispers of heaven through the cracks. The nun near the altar slumps forward now, panting softly, her forehead against the stone. Her vision has passed. She looks exhausted, emptied, but also radiant, like something touched her, filled her up, and then slipped away again. Around her, no one claps, no one questions. They simply wait, watching the candlelight flicker in her sweat-damp hair. You shift in your seat, wondering if this is any different than the monk's beer or the midwife's flying ointment. Sure, it comes dressed in sanctity instead of secrecy, but the end result is similar, an altered state, a softened veil between this world and whatever might be beyond it. And maybe, just maybe, it was safer to get high in God's name than in the forest with a broomstick. You imagine a young nun, desperate for meaning, fasting for days, whispering psalms until her voice disappears, then lying on the cold stone and waiting for the vision. Did she want to see heaven? Or did she just want to feel something she could name? The candles burn lower. The nun is helped up by another sister, who smiles and murmurs something only she can hear. They move toward the back of the chapel together, leaving you alone in the shifting light. And just before you stand, you feel it. A hum. Not sound, not exactly. a kind of vibration in the air in your chest, like the walls are holding their breath. Maybe it's the incense, maybe it's the silence, or maybe, just for a second, you caught a bit of that ecstasy too. You step outside into the cold night, and the stars overhead look just a little closer than they should. You're in a cluttered room now, somewhere between a library and a laboratory, where the air smells like burnt sugar, spoiled wine, and something vaguely metallic, like rusted coins soaked in perfume. Glass vials clink softly as they sway in a wooden rack, and over in the corner a man in a robe that's half singed leans over a brass still muttering to himself. His beard is stained dark from ink and something that might be elderberry wine. He has the look of someone who hasn't slept in 2 days and thinks sleep is a kind of weakness anyway. You're in the company of an alchemist, but don't get ahead of yourself. This isn't the fantasy version where he turns base metals into gold while talking to dragons. This is the medieval flavour, half philosopher, half amateur chemist, with a splash of hopeful madness. And tonight he's working on something very special, the elixir of life, or at least something that won't set his eyebrows on fire again. He pours a reddish liquid into a retort and lights a small flame beneath it. The whole contraption hisses and burps in a way that suggests things are either going very well or about to explode. He gives you a grin that's mostly teeth and gestures for you to sit, handing you a small cup of cloudy liquid. "For the soul," he says. You raise it to your lips, and it tastes like regret and mulled wine, with a hint of something that makes your tongue go numb. Here's your historical fact of the night. Alchemy was more than just proto-chemistry. It was a deeply spiritual pursuit, a blend of science, mysticism, and philosophy. Alchemists weren't just trying to transform metals, they were trying to transform themselves, to purify the soul through the purification of matter, to find the philosopher's stone, yes, but also to reach a higher state of being. And along the way, they stumbled onto all kinds of interesting substances. Some of these were harmless, like distilled herbs or flower waters. Others were less so. Mercury, sulfur, lead. Materials you really shouldn't be drinking, even if you think they'll align your inner humours. But then there was alcohol. Sweet, golden, flammable alcohol. Distilled, concentrated, and increasingly popular not just for consumption, but for preservation, sanitation, and, ironically, immortality. That brings us to your quirky fact. The process of distilling alcohol was refined by medieval alchemists who were initially trying to isolate the spirit of substances. They believed that alcohol, especially a clear, strong variety known as aqua vitae, or water of life, contained the essence of purity itself. The more you refined it, the more spiritual it became, and if you drank it, well, maybe you got a little closer to perfection, or at least a little farther from reality. Scholarly debate time. Was all this just an excuse to get drunk and call it holy? Some historians think so. The alchemist's notebooks were filled with elaborate metaphors that conveniently disguised their actual experiments, making it hard to know what they were genuinely aiming for. Others argue that these men, and they were mostly men, were sincere, that they believed deeply that each bubbling flask and stinking crucible brought them one step closer to divine truth. And maybe they weren't wrong. After all, the foundations of modern chemistry, medicine, and pharmacology owe a huge debt to these slightly singed philosophers. Back in the lab, your alchemist friend removes the flask from the flame and holds it up to the light. It's glowing faintly, but that could just be the candle behind it. He pours a bit more into your cup, and this time it goes down smoother, warmer. You feel it settle in your chest like a small fire being kindled. Not wild, not painful, just slow. You sink a little deeper into your chair. He tells you about the stages of transformation, nigredo, the blackening, where everything breaks down, albedo, the whitening when clarity starts to return, rubedo, the reddening, the final stage of perfection. You try to follow, but the words blend together like smoke rings. He's not talking about metal anymore. He's talking about people. You close your eyes just for a second. and you see it. Swirling colours, symbols you don't understand, and the feeling that something just beneath the surface of your skin is stretching, waking up. Maybe it's the wine, maybe it's the fumes, or maybe this strange old man actually managed to bottle a little transcendence. When you open your eyes, he's staring at you, like he's waiting for an answer you haven't formed yet. "You see it, don't you?" he says, not expecting a reply. He just nods and returns to his work. The room feels bigger now, or maybe you've shrunk. The walls shimmer slightly like they're breathing. The flame under the still flickers with more colours than fire usually knows. And even though your mind is fuzzy, your heart feels oddly calm. Safe even. Like you've just been let in on a secret the world forgot. This isn't just drunkenness. It's not even euphoria. It's potential. The idea that something old and sacred is still tucked inside these dusty bottles and copper coils. That somewhere in the mess of melted wax and scalded fingertips, someone once touched the edge of something eternal and left a recipe behind. You leave the room sometime later, not entirely sure how long you were there. The stars overhead look impossibly sharp, like each one is etched into the sky with a glass needle. You walk slower now, not because you're dizzy, but because the world seems worth watching again. The elixir might not make you immortal, but tonight it made everything feel more alive. You're standing at the edge of a cobblestone square and something is off. There's a sound in the air, faint at first but growing louder, a rhythm, feet slapping the stones, clapping maybe? A strange shuffling beat that seems too fast to be ceremonial, too chaotic to be coordinated. You round a corner and suddenly you're in the middle of it. Dozens, no, hundreds of people are dancing. Not the kind of dancing you see at a feast or a wedding. This is wild, frantic. People moving with abandon, eyes wide, bodies slick with sweat, limbs flailing like marionettes cut from their strings. You've just stumbled into the dancing plague. It's summer, 1518, Strasbourg. Or maybe another town, another year, because this kind of thing happened more than once. But this one's famous. It started with one woman. She began dancing in the street alone. No music, no audience. Just this compulsive, urgent movement that wouldn't stop. And then others joined her. Dozens by the end of the week. Within a month, it was hundreds. Some danced until they collapsed. Some danced until they died. Heart failure, exhaustion, stroke. No one really knows. But they couldn't stop. You try to walk through the crowd, but it's not easy. The dancers aren't paying attention to anything. They slam into walls, stagger into doorways, tumble into fountains. There are broken toes, bloody noses, arms flailing like they're fighting invisible opponents. And the strangest part? No one's laughing. This isn't fun. It's not joyful. It's desperate. Terrifying. It's like they're trying to dance something out of themselves. City officials thought it might be a curse, or a punishment, or a disease. So what did they do? They built a stage, hired musicians, gave the dancers space to move. Their logic? If dancing is the illness, maybe more dancing is the cure. A bold strategy, Cotton. But it didn't help. In fact, it may have made things worse. Here's your historical fact. The dancing plague of 1518 is real. It's documented in letters, municipal records, and reports by physicians of the time, and it wasn't an isolated incident. Similar outbreaks occurred throughout the 14th to 17th centuries, often in times of famine, plague, or war. People just danced for days, sometimes weeks, with no clear explanation. Now for the fringe fact. Some historians believe the dancers were under the influence of ergot. Yep, our old friend, the fungus that grows on damp rye. It produces compounds similar to LSD, and in large doses can cause hallucinations, muscle spasms, and convulsions. It's possible that a bad batch of bread sparked mass hallucinations that the townspeople interpreted as divine punishment or demonic possession. Others suggest it was a form of mass psychogenic illness, a fancy term for when people's minds break under stress and their bodies follow. But then there's the third theory, the weird one. The one that says this wasn't illness at all, it was ritual or protest. A suppressed echo of pagan traditions that never fully died. In times of despair, when crops failed and babies starved, some believe villagers fell into trances not from madness, but from a collective unconscious need to move, to mourn, to rage, to enter ecstasy together and shake the horror from their bones. And honestly, as you stand among the flailing arms and heaving chests, you kind of get it. There's something about the rhythm, the beat. Even without music, it's there. You feel it in your teeth, in your ribs, in the soles of your feet. The temptation to join in is real, even though your brain screams that this isn't joy. It's surrender. You watch a man in his 50s spin until he drops. His chest rises and falls rapidly, then stops. No one notices, or maybe they notice but don't stop. A woman nearby sobs as she dances. Another laughs hysterically, her eyes empty. One young girl dances with her arms stretched upward, face lifted toward the sky as if waiting for something to pluck her up and end this. And still the rhythm goes on. You think about what it must have felt like, being poor, hungry, afraid of plague and death and damnation. Your village priest tells you God is angry. The fields are dry, your neighbours are dying. And then, one day, someone dances, and suddenly you're free, if only for a moment, if only because you've forgotten what standing still feels like. But here's what no one knows, why it stopped. Eventually the dancing fades. The music, if there ever was any, falls silent. The crowd disperses, many carried away on wooden carts too weak to walk. No real answers, just silence, as if whatever it was had passed. You walk back through the empty square. The stones are stained with sweat and blood. There's a shoe in the gutter, a shred of linen caught on a bench. The smell of crushed herbs lingers. Maybe basil, maybe wormwood, maybe something else. And as you pass the alley where it all began, you feel a twitch in your own foot. A little tap, a beat. You stop it quickly. But it was there. And that's the thing about the Middle Ages. You never really knew when something strange would grab hold of your body and drag you somewhere your mind couldn't follow. You're in a kitchen now, though kitchen might be too generous a word for this space. It's a dim, smoky room with low beams and soot-streaked walls, full of sharp smells and dull clanging. A woman stands near the hearth stirring a pot of something thick and greyish-brown, while behind her, loaves of dark bread cool on wooden planks. Nothing about it seems out of place. Just another day, another meal. But there's something in the air. A tension. A weird buzz. Like the walls are listening. Or maybe it's just the bread. Because this isn't just any loaf. It's rye bread. Fresh, warm, slightly sour, and almost certainly cursed. Okay, not literally cursed, but here's the thing. Rye, when stored in damp conditions, can develop a little fungal hitchhiker known as Claviceps purpurea, also called ergot. And ergot, as it turns out, is basically nature's version of LSD. It's not the kind of thing you'd taste. It doesn't smell funny. But eat too much of it, and suddenly that pot over the fire starts singing hymns, and your neighbour's goat is wearing a bishop's hat. You sit at the table eyeing the bread warily. It's dark, dense, coarse, peasant food mostly. The nobility preferred wheat, refined, expensive, and much less likely to be hallucinogenic. But you're not noble, so you break off a piece, chew, and swallow. It tastes normal, earthy, a little sour, nothing alarming, yet. And then things begin to shift. Your fingers tingle, your ears ring faintly. The woman stirring the pot turns and her eyes seem too big for her face, like she's wearing a mask stretched over her real one. You blink. It's fine. Probably. Outside the window, the trees leaning closer than they were a moment ago. The shadows on the floor start writhing, rearranging into patterns that almost mean something. Here's your historical fact. Outbreaks of ergot poisoning, also known as St. Anthony's fire, were documented throughout medieval Europe. Victims experience seizures, hallucinations, convulsions, and burning sensations in their limbs. In severe cases, it caused gangrene, leading to fingers and toes blackening and falling off. Entire villages suffered. Monasteries tried to help, often invoking St. Anthony, the patron saint of skin diseases, hence the name. And now for your fringe fact. Some scholars speculate that the strange behaviours associated with witchcraft, flying, visions, uncontrollable fits, could in part be explained by ergot poisoning. If a community unknowingly consumed contaminated grain, it could lead to outbreaks of mass hysteria or trance-like behaviour. In other words, some of those accused of witchcraft might have just had a bad sandwich. There's even a theory, whispered around the edges of academic circles, that ergot played a role in the infamous Salem witch trials. A humid climate, a bad rye harvest, and suddenly half the town is seeing demons. Did the same thing happen in medieval Europe? Did an entire village hallucinate wolves in the forest and witches in the sky because someone forgot to dry their grain properly? It's hard to say, and you're not really in a place to argue because now the room is gently spinning and you swear the fire just winked at you. The woman notices your face and hands you a cup of weak ale. Not to sober you up, nothing short of time will do that, but to soften the ride. She's seen this before, too many times. Bad harvests lead to desperation, and desperation doesn't check for fungus. She sits across from you, calmly sipping her own drink, as if she's grown used to watching reality unravel one villager at a time. You ask her if it's always like this, if the bread does this often. She shrugs. Some years, yes. Some years, no. That's it. That's the safety protocol. Sometimes the bread is fine. Sometimes it sends the entire household into a night of visions and terror. And you realise, sitting there, trying to remember whether your hand always had 6 fingers, or if that's new, that in medieval life, the line between nourishment and danger was always thin. Even your daily bread could betray you. You stand and stumble to the door, needing air. The cool breeze hits your face like a blessing. The world outside seems quieter, but also sharper, like you're seeing it through freshly cleaned glass. The sky pulses. The grass hums. You hear whispers, soft and unintelligible, from behind a hedge, and when you look, there's nothing there. You lean against a wall and try to focus on your breath. In, out, and slowly the buzzing begins to fade. The edges blur. Your heartbeat settles. The high, if you want to call it that, recedes like a tide. You're back, mostly. But that loaf? It's still sitting on the table, and tomorrow someone else might take a bite and see angels in the chimney, or claw at their skin because it feels like it's burning from the inside out. This isn't witchcraft. This isn't medicine. This is what happens when food turns against you. And still, they eat. You're back in a tavern, but it's not the sleepy, humble kind from earlier. The one where tired farmers murmured stories over mugs of thin ale. No, this one's louder, hotter, and alive in a way that feels almost theatrical. The air is heavy with the smell of sweat, spilled drink, fire-roasted meat, and something sour and sticky, like overripe fruit or someone's half-forgotten breath. Laughter roars like thunder from a dark corner, followed by the unmistakable thud of someone falling off a bench. You've stepped into the heart of medieval nightlife. Welcome to the tavern, after hours. There's no music, not exactly, but the rhythm is there in the clink of mugs, the rise and fall of voices, and the occasional crash when someone knocks over a platter of food. A fire crackles in a giant stone hearth, its light dancing across cracked mugs and red noses. The table you're sitting at rocks slightly with every movement, but nobody cares. A man next to you slaps your back with the enthusiasm of someone who barely remembers your name but considers you a brother anyway. This place isn't for the sober. It's not even for the moderately buzzed. It's for those seeking forgetfulness, or at least something loud enough to drown out their regrets. People drink here not to relax, but to transform. You watch as a woman, barefoot, red-faced, leans across the table and shouts a story about a demon disguised as a chicken. You catch maybe 3 words. Everyone laughs like it's the best tale they've ever heard. Here's your historical fact. Taverns were central to medieval community life. While the church often looked down on excessive drinking, the tavern was one of the few places where class, gender and status could blur. For a few hours, a stable hand could argue politics with a merchant. A washerwoman could trade insults with a knight's squire. It wasn't equality, but it was a shared escape. Alehouses, inns and public drinking rooms served as unofficial courts, stages, confessional booths and therapy sessions, all fueled by endless tankards of ale, mead and eventually strong spirits. Tavern tales were their own kind of medicine. Stories about devils, saints, thieves and lovers poured out in exaggerated tones, often tailored for whatever emotional state the drinkers were floating through. Some tales were meant to scare, some to seduce. Some were so stupid they looped back around to brilliance. And always, they got louder with each round. Now here's a fringe fact to swirl in your mug. Some of the stories told in these taverns were said to be so intense, so vivid, that listeners swore they saw what was being described. Not metaphorically, literally. A man describes a glowing stag and 3 people gasp, pointing toward the corner of the room. A woman talks about a demon with glowing green eyes, and suddenly half the table won't look toward the window. Were they drunk? Of course. But there's something about communal storytelling paired with altered states that can create a shared hallucination. We'd call it suggestibility. They called it proof. And then there's the debate. Were taverns a threat to social order or a release valve that kept society from tearing itself apart? Authorities often cracked down on public drunkenness, fearing that chaos and immorality lurked at the bottom of every mug. But others, quietly, grudgingly, understood that without these spaces the pressure of daily life might explode in more dangerous ways. Better a man shout nonsense in a tavern than raise a pitchfork outside a lord's manor. You swirl your drink and listen as a one-eyed traveller starts a new tale. It's about a bridge that vanishes in fog and reappears only to those who've lost something precious. His voice dips low, then rises into a dramatic bellow. You look around, and for a moment the room is suspended, every listener caught in the spell. Even the barmaid pauses, mug in hand, mouth slightly open. It's not the drink. Or rather, it's not just the drink. It's the drink paired with story, with flickering firelight, with the exact right level of weariness and wonder. It's a kind of high, not chemical, not herbal, but emotional. An altered state of mind where logic takes a back seat and imagination slides behind the wheel, tankard in hand. A man across the room suddenly stands and shouts, convinced his long-dead dog just walked past his chair. People cheer. No one questions it. Another man swears he saw St. George in the rafters. You raise your mug. Why not? Maybe you saw him too. The longer you stay, the more the line between story and reality smears. The walls seem less straight, the shadows more cooperative. Your head is light, your stomach warm, and your thoughts feel like they've been dipped in honey. Slow, sticky, pleasant. And then, just as the fire burns low and the stories turn quiet, the room softens. People lean on each other, eyes half closed, their loud laughter now replaced by soft murmurs or snoring. No one leaves yet. Leaving means remembering. Leaving means walking into the cold and the silence. For now they stay, adrift in that rare medieval moment when the world feels safe enough to forget. You rest your head against the wall, the stone cool against your cheek. You're not asleep, but you're not entirely awake either, just floating in the haze of drink and story. And in this flickering, beer-soaked stillness, you think maybe this was the only therapy most of them ever had. Tomorrow, life returns. But tonight, you're allowed to forget. The room you're in now doesn't feel like much at first. It's small, stuffy, and organised with a kind of aggressive tidiness that screams, "I do not trust the chaos of nature, thank you very much." Shelves are packed with flasks, bundles of dried herbs, jars sealed with wax, and strange handwritten labels with names you can't pronounce. It smells like vinegar and mildew and maybe licorice, if licorice had been abandoned in a root cellar for 20 years. You've wandered into the domain of a medieval doctor, or something that looks like one anyway. The man before you isn't wearing robes or shining with holy authority. He's squinting into a glass vessel like it just insulted him. His fingers are stained yellow, his sleeves crusted with something sticky, and he's muttering about ratios. Welcome to the lab of someone convinced that if he boils the right herb in the right wine for the right number of minutes, he can fix anything. Baldness, blindness, broken hearts, buboes, and if not, at least it'll taste so bad you'll stop complaining. Tonight's experiment? Wormwood. A bitter, silvery green plant that looks harmless but kicks like a mule. It's sharp on the tongue, numbing on the lips, and in the right dose. Just enough to leave the world tilting slightly under your feet. The doctor calls it a tonic. You watch as he drops a tiny pinch of it into a cup of wine and hands it to you with a straight face. You're hesitant, but the man hasn't died yet, and that's the only credential you need tonight. It hits immediately. First the bitterness, then the strange warmth that spreads down your throat and into your chest, then a slow easing, like your thoughts are unbuttoning their collars and settling back in their chairs. Now for your historical fact, wormwood was a staple in medieval medicine. Its Latin name, Artemisia absinthium, shows up in herbals from every corner of Europe. It was used to treat intestinal worms, stomach ailments and melancholy, basically anything that could be blamed on bad humours or the moon. Healers believed its bitterness could stimulate the spirits, and it often appeared in bitters, tonics and medicinal wines. Not pleasant but potent. Later, of course, wormwood would gain notoriety as a key ingredient in absinthe, the famously green, famously dangerous drink of 19th century poets and painters. But long before that, it was doing its thing in dark little rooms like this one, helping medieval folks cope with indigestion, depression, and a general sense that the world was just slightly off. And here's your fringe fact. Some ancient and medieval texts warned that overuse of wormwood could cause vivid dreams, fits, or madness. Not because it was hallucinogenic in the modern sense, but because it had subtle neurological effects. Combine it with fasting, illness, or a strong base like fortified wine, and suddenly your thoughts start humming a different tune. Not a full-on trip, but a definite bend in the road. The doctor hands you a second drink, this one clearer, sharper, and smelling like a pine forest in a lightning storm. This'll really get the bile moving, he says with unnerving enthusiasm. You sip. It's like drinking regret. Your eyes water, your ears ring. For a second you forget your own name. This apparently means it's working. He starts listing the other bitter tonics in his collection. Gentian root, calamus, horehound, rue. Plants designed to shock the system, to drive out bad spirits and bad moods alike. The theory is simple. If it tastes terrible, it must be good for you. If it doesn't taste terrible, he adds more wormwood. Now here's where things get interesting. There's a scholarly debate about how effective any of this actually was. Some historians argue that medieval medicine was basically guesswork dressed up in Latin. Others believe there was real wisdom buried in the bitterness. After all, many of the herbs used then are still part of modern pharmaceuticals. But when it comes to wormwood, the debate lingers. Was it truly therapeutic? Or did it just create such a strong sensory reaction that people believed it was working? The man pulls out a small jar of powder and shows it to you. Crushed dried liver, he says, to balance the mixture. You hand the jar back slowly. Still, there's something about the ritual of it all. The careful measurement, the trial and error, the belief that nature holds answers. If you're just stubborn enough to find them, it's messy, yes, primitive, sure, but also kind of beautiful. In a time when people didn't know where disease came from or why death came so suddenly, they still fought back, with roots and vinegar and wormwood steeped in wine. The room spins slightly, not from intoxication but from clarity. You're starting to feel what the medievals might have felt, a mixture of warmth, lightness, and distant nausea. The tonic burns your throat, yes, but your joints don't ache as much now. Your breath feels deeper. You swear your thoughts are moving faster, even if they're just circling the same idea over and over. This is horrible, and you want more. You lean against the table. The doctor is still muttering, scribbling notes, pouring, straining, shaking. You realise he's not just treating others, he's treating himself. Every day, every mixture is part therapy, part hope. A way to believe that the body can be persuaded, that bitterness can pull the poison out. You leave the room with a stomach full of wormwood and regret, the taste still clinging to your tongue like moss. Outside, the air feels cleaner, sharper, like someone scrubbed the sky. You're not cured, but you're changed. Even if it's just in the way your mouth curls at the memory of that awful, awful drink. You're spinning, slowly, softly, nothing wild, nothing fast, just a measured, steady turn, like the world is rotating beneath you, and you're staying perfectly still at its centre. But of course, you're not still at all. Your arms are out, your robe flares slightly with each motion, and around you others are spinning too, in perfect silence. No instruments, no clapping, just the wind of movement and the soft brush of fabric against stone. Welcome to the dance of the Sufis. You've left Western Europe for a moment, stepped out of the muddy taverns and smoky kitchens, and into the serene, hypnotic world of medieval Islamic mysticism. You're standing in a courtyard, ringed with whitewashed arches and shaded by olive trees. The air is dry, clean, scented with dust and saffron. The men here are dressed simply, most barefoot, eyes soft and unfocused, not lost, just looking inward. This is no performance, this is devotion. And the high they're chasing is something far deeper than pleasure. This is the sama, the practice of listening and turning, the spiritual ritual of the Sufi mystics, whose whirling movement, poetry, and meditative chants were designed to bring them closer to God. It's not about entertainment. It's not about showing off. It's about annihilation, the dissolving of the self in divine love. The spinning? That's not the goal. It's the doorway. Your feet begin to move in small circles, following the lead of the others. Your arms stretch out, one hand pointed upward to receive the divine, the other downward to deliver it to the earth. You keep your gaze soft, fixed on one unmoving point, while your body turns and turns and turns. Historical fact for tonight. The Mevlevi order of whirling dervishes was founded in the 13th century, inspired by the Persian poet and mystic Jalal al-Din Rumi. Rumi believed music, poetry and dance were not distractions from the divine, but pathways to it. Through disciplined spinning, practitioners entered a trance-like state where the boundary between body and soul thinned and a sense of unity with God could be felt. Not theorized, not studied, felt. The idea sounds simple, the practice is not. You try to keep turning, arms steady, feet gliding, body upright, but it's harder than it looks. You begin to wobble, your stomach clenches, your sense of direction unravels, and yet the dervishes around you keep going, their movements fluid, faces serene. They've trained for this. They've disciplined themselves into surrender. Here's your fringe fact. Some early Sufi writings describe experiences that sound a lot like altered states. Visions, lights, hearing voices, even levitation. Not from drugs, but from repetition, from rhythm, from fasting, spinning, chanting for hours until the self collapses inwards and only presence remains. Some even claim to have seen the face of God, not metaphorically, but with an eye turned inward. The eye of the heart, they called it. Now for the scholarly debate. Were these mystical states real spiritual experiences, or neurologically induced trances? Modern researchers have studied the dervish whirl and its effects on the brain. Turns out this kind of spinning, combined with meditative breathing, can alter brainwave patterns, triggering a shift into theta states, the same frequencies associated with dreaming, deep meditation, and yes, psychedelic trips. In other words, what took other cultures a handful of mushrooms or an infusion of mandrake, The Sufi is accomplished with nothing but breath and motion. And as you spin, something in you starts to loosen. The usual weight you carry, thoughts, fears, body aches, that memory you keep picking at like a scab, it all starts to fall away. Not disappear, but drift. Your centre holds, while the world slips around you. For a brief moment, it doesn't feel like you're spinning at all. It feels like you're completely still, and everything else is turning. The courtyard blurs, the faces around you dissolve, time stretches out like warm wax. You feel tears on your cheeks, though you don't remember crying. You feel laughter bubbling in your throat, but you're not laughing. You are breath. You are motion. You are nowhere. You are everywhere. Then a hand touches your shoulder, gently bringing you to stillness. The world tilts. Your knees tremble. You sit down on a cushion, heart pounding, drenched in sweat but freezing cold. One of the men brings you a small cup of rosewater. It tastes like waking up. No one applauds. No one speaks. This wasn't a show. This was prayer with the body. You rest your head back and look up at the sky. The stars feel closer here, not because they've moved, but because you have. Something in you has shifted, quieted, realigned. The high is fading, but the peace remains. You think of all the ways humans have reached for transcendence. Drink, smoke, herbs, dreams, and now, turning. Always searching for the same thing. To rise above the noise, to feel held, to disappear, just for a while. And here, in the warm silence of the night, you understand something that can't be explained. Only spun into. You're standing in the village square now, and it's bright, uncomfortably so. Not because of the sun, but because of all the eyes. People are gathered in a loose, grim circle, some whispering, others trying very hard not to look at the woman at the centre. She's on a raised wooden platform, hands bound, her head hung low. There's no fire, no gallows, nothing that dramatic. Just a contraption made of iron and leather, resting on a stool next to her. You realise what it is a second too late. The Scold's bridle. You shift uneasily as two men lift the device and begin to fit it over her head. It's a metal cage, cold and crude, shaped roughly like a helmet, but with a long, thin plate designed to press down against the tongue. Once it's fastened, she won't be able to speak. Not clearly, not loudly, not without pain. This is what happened when you talked too much, they said. When you gossiped. When you spoke back. When you challenged the wrong man in the wrong tone on the wrong day. This wasn't about witchcraft or heresy. It was about control. You're not watching justice. You're watching humiliation as punishment. And everyone in the crowd is learning the lesson. You stand at the edge, unsure what to do. Part of you wants to turn away. Another part wants to run up and shout. But you do neither, because in this time, in this place, raising your voice might be enough to earn you your own iron cage. Now here's your historical fact. The Scold's bridle, or branks, depending on the region, was a real punishment device used in parts of medieval and early modern Europe, particularly in England and Scotland. It was used almost exclusively on women, and it didn't kill or cripple. It silenced, publicly, visibly, often for hours at a time. Some bridles had bells attached, so everyone could hear the scold coming. Others had spikes inside the mouthpiece, so speaking meant bleeding. And here's the bitter twist. Some of the women forced to wear it weren't even guilty of the accusations against them. Some simply had opinions, some drank too much. Some, it's whispered, may have been using the kinds of herbal remedies that brought on strange dreams, unpredictable behaviour, or sudden fits of laughter. Things that could look like madness or defiance, depending on who was watching. Now for your fringe fact, a few records suggest that some women, after wearing the bridle, experience strange sensations, loss of taste, visual distortions, even moments of euphoria. Historians now speculate that prolonged oxygen restriction, stress-induced endorphins, or underlying exposure to neuroactive herbs may have triggered brief, altered states. In other words, the punishment may have accidentally induced the very behaviour it sought to suppress. But the deeper question, the one that still haunts scholars, is why so many people accepted this kind of punishment. Did they really believe it was necessary? Or did they just fear being next? You notice a man in the crowd shaking his head and muttering something about witches and spirits. He's not angry, he's resigned. Like this is just how things go. You wonder how many women in this village have stood on that platform, how many herbs have gone unharvested, how many stories were never told because someone was afraid of iron and humiliation. You think back to the nun, lost in ecstasy, the healer in the woods brewing her ointments, the woman who slipped mandrake into wine just to sleep through the night. Were they truly dangerous, or were they simply inconvenient? The woman on the platform raises her eyes now slowly. She finds yours in the crowd. The bridle is clamped down, her jaw visibly tense from holding still, but her eyes, they say everything. Anger, sadness, and something else. Defiance. You hold her gaze for just a moment before someone jostles past you, muttering about being late for the market. The moment breaks. She's led down from the platform and the crowd begins to disperse. No one speaks to her. She limps toward the edge of town, shoulders stiff, the bridle glinting in the sun. It'll come off eventually. But the silence, that lingers. You walk away, the image stuck in your mind like a thorn. It's not just about punishment, it's about erasure. In a time when voices were already few, stealing one was a form of violence more complete than bloodshed. And yet, in spite of it all, they kept talking, in secret, in whispers, around hearths and under trees, recipes passed from hand to hand, stories shared by candlelight, laughter stifled but not erased. The high of rebellion, even the quiet kind, was sometimes just staying alive long enough to tell the truth again. And maybe that's the strangest part. In a world of swords and fire and public pain, sometimes the most dangerous thing you could be was heard. You're somewhere quieter now, much quieter. The kind of quiet that only money can afford. Velvet drapes, a fireplace not for cooking but for mood, tapestries that hang more for bragging rights than warmth. The stone walls are cleaner here, smoother, and the scent in the air isn't smoke or sweat or wet hay. It's something imported, something spicy and unfamiliar. Cinnamon, cardamom, maybe clove. You're inside the private chamber of someone highborn, someone important, someone who doesn't wear their entire life on their back. A noblewoman lounges on a cushioned bench, a thin veil over her face, more for elegance than modesty. In one hand she holds a painted fan, in the other a cup of something that definitely isn't just wine. Her maid is heating something over coals, a small ceramic dish, giving off curling tendrils of smoke that twist like dancers in the air. You catch the scent and feel it hit you, not like a punch, but like velvet against the back of your eyes. Sweet, smoky, strangely grounding. This is the other side of getting high in the medieval world, the elite edition. Less desperate, less dangerous, but still layered with the same intent. To escape, to drift, to soften the world's edges until everything seems bathed in candlelight, and you can pretend you've never seen a muddy street in your life. Here's your historical fact. Imported herbs, spices and substances were status symbols among the upper class. They weren't just ingredients, they were experiences. Cloves from the Moluccas, myrrh from the east, hashish from North Africa, opium from trade routes winding through Persia and Byzantium. Nobles didn't just consume them for health. They used them for pleasure, for sleep, for sensation. Smoking mixtures, perfumed oils, and infused wines were all part of the luxurious lifestyle, especially during feasts, intimate gatherings, or the long, melancholic hours between prayer and politics. The nobleman in the next room is reclining, legs stretched across a cushioned chaise, watching as a servant grinds dried flowers into powder. He isn't hiding what he's doing. He isn't whispering over a steaming cauldron in the woods. He's indulging, openly, elegantly. He dabs a bit of powder onto his tongue and leans back, eyes half closed, as if expecting a vision to arrive via appointment. And it might. Here's your fringe fact. Some elite circles in medieval Islamic and Mediterranean courts were known to use cannabis in paste or resin form, hashish, for meditative or recreational purposes. Consumed slowly, in low doses, it didn't send them into frenzies or fits, it just floated them, helped them think more poetically. Some claimed it deepened their understanding of philosophy. Others said it just made the wine taste better. There's a scholarly debate, of course. How widespread was this elite indulgence? Some argue that most nobles didn't dare mess with substances that altered the mind, especially under the scrutiny of church and state. But others point to personal journals, court poetry, and travelogues that hint at quiet, fragrant evenings spent in a haze of exotic smoke and imported wine. It wasn't a party, it was a mood. You sit now on a carved bench near the fire, holding a small cup of golden liquid that smells like honey and something floral, maybe saffron, maybe rose. It coats your mouth like syrup, slow and warm, and settles into your belly like a soft exhale. No hallucinations, no flying, just calm. The kind of calm you didn't know you were missing. The noblewoman begins to hum, a slow, haunting tune. Her eyes drift closed, her head resting against the embroidered wall hanging behind her. In the low light, it's easy to believe you've left time behind. This chamber could be a temple, a dream, a lie, but you don't care, because for once, nothing hurts, nothing pulls, nothing bites. You walk to the window and look out over the courtyard. Servants move like shadows below. Horses shuffle in their stalls. The scent of jasmine drifts in on the breeze. And from up here, the world looks almost bearable. This isn't the desperate high of the hungry. It isn't the spiritual euphoria of the mystic. It isn't the accidental chaos of poisoned bread, or the frantic ecstasy of the spinning dervish. This is curated, intentional, silk-lined escape. The kind of altered state that comes with cushions and quiet and the illusion of control. But it's still a high, because in the end, the need is the same. Whether you're a farmer or a duchess or a thief with a bruised rib and nothing in your stomach, you're still looking for the same thing. A break, a hush, a way to crawl out of your body for a few precious minutes and forget the weight of existence. A servant offers you another cup. You take it. Outside, somewhere far below this tower of comfort, someone else is drinking to sleep through the cold. Someone is spinning in a courtyard. Someone is being dragged to the platform in the village square. You sip again. The room glows. And for a moment you forget all their names, even your own. You're lying down now, not on stone, not in straw, but something softer. Wool, maybe, or a stack of cloaks someone piled beneath you. It smells faintly of lavender and sleep sweat. You're in a small chamber, round and dim, the light coming from a single oil lamp that flickers lazily on a wooden stool. There are herbs hanging from the rafters overhead, bundles of them, dried and crackling when the air moves. Chamomile, valerian, yarrow, lemon balm. Someone's taken great care to arrange them, and you're beginning to suspect that tonight you're the patient. A woman sits beside you. She's older, wrapped in shawls. Her eyes clouded but calm. She doesn't speak unless she has to. She picks up a clay bowl and stirs its contents with a carved wooden spoon, slowly, like the act itself is part of the medicine. The mixture inside is thick, dark and bubbling gently from the heat of a nearby brazier. The smell rising from it is earthy, sweet, and just a little bitter, like overripe fruit, crushed leaves, and a memory you're not quite ready to remember. Tonight's remedy is not for fever or wounds or even childbirth. Tonight's remedy is for dreams. She pours the liquid into a small cup and hands it to you. Her touch is warm, her fingers surprisingly strong. You hesitate for a second. Then you drink. Here's your historical fact. Medieval herbalists had an entire catalogue of plants dedicated not just to sleep, but to dreaming. Valerian root was a favourite, strong smelling and reliable, often ground into powder or steeped in wine. Mugwort was even more interesting. It was said to bring on vivid dreams and was sometimes placed beneath pillows or burned before bed. Poppy seeds, carefully measured, were used to lull fussy children or ease the pain of night terrors. Even lettuce, the blandest of vegetables, had a reputation as a sleep aid when boiled into a thick tea. But the real magic wasn't just in the ingredients, it was in the intention. The belief that certain herbs could not only help you sleep, but guide you through your dreams. That the right brew could lead your soul into safe territory, or let you speak to the dead, or help you receive a message from the divine. Dreaming wasn't idle in the Middle Ages, it was active, important. Another way to know things. The woman beside you begins to hum softly, a low melody that feels older than words. You feel your body sink. Your limbs grow heavy, but your mind loosens, drifting upward like a candle flame untethered from its wick. Here's a fringe fact for your sleepy brain. Some medieval dream rituals involved complex preparations, fasting, prayer, sleeping in a church overnight, or lying on the grave of a saint. This was called incubation, and the dream was expected to be a message from beyond. But not everyone waited for saints. Some used dream herbs to take matters into their own hands. In certain traditions, witches and wise women were said to visit each other in dreams, using mugwort or henbane to walk the dream paths and exchange knowledge without ever leaving their beds. And of course there's the debate. Were these experiences real visions, or just the result of mild intoxication, poor nutrition, and highly suggestible minds? Some historians argue that herbal dream guides were essentially a medieval form of self-hypnosis. Others believe the line between physical and spiritual was simply drawn differently then. The body might sleep, but the soul could travel, and no one questioned that too hard. After all, who wants to argue with a woman who says she dreamed of her dead husband warning her about a fire, and then the barn actually burns down? Back in the room, the woman is blowing out the oil lamp. The glow fades, and you're left in the dark. Not frightening dark, but quiet dark. The kind that feels padded. Your eyelids drop without effort. Your breath slows. Somewhere the herbs begin to do their work. At first there's nothing. Just that warm heaviness pressing you gently into the cloaks. But then your thoughts begin to loosen, and you feel yourself floating above the bed, above the room. You see the bundles of herbs from a new angle, their leaves dancing in the dark like little flags. You pass through the thatched roof, up into the open sky, where stars drift like embers from a sacred fire. You are weightless, wordless, your body a memory, your mind a thread unravelling across the night. You land in a meadow that doesn't exist, or does, but only here. The moon is too big, the grass hums, a fox walks by wearing a crown of rowan berries. You laugh, not from joy, but because it feels like the only possible reaction. Somewhere nearby someone calls your name, but it's not your name. Not the one people use. It's the name only dreams remember. And when you wake, much later, or maybe only minutes have passed, you feel changed. Not healed, not completely, but like something was cleared out, as if sleep scrubbed your soul with a bundle of herbs and left the windows open to let the rest blow away. The woman is still there, sipping her own brew, eyes closed but not asleep. She knew you'd return. And now, you know, not all highs are wild, some come soft, quiet as steam, fragrant as dried petals hanging in the dark. You're deep in the woods now, where the trees grow so thick and tangled that the light filters in like syrup. Slow, golden, and reluctant. The air smells like wet bark, crushed moss, and something sharp and fungal that tingles behind your nose. It's the kind of forest that doesn't care about human time. Seasons don't pass here, they settle, and somewhere just ahead, in a clearing surrounded by stones and overgrown roots, something waits. You're not alone. There are 5 of them, men and women hooded and silent, sitting in a loose circle on woven mats. No one speaks. A fire crackles in the centre, small but hot. its smoke curling upward into the trees like it's trying not to be noticed. One of them, a man with a long braid and soot-black fingers, opens a pouch and pulls out a handful of small dried caps and stems. Mushrooms, brown, shriveled, and unimpressive unless you know what you're looking for. You do now. He begins to pass them around. No ceremony, no chant, just a simple exchange, as quiet as breathing. You watch as each person places a few into their mouth and chews slowly, eyes closed. No grimaces, no hesitation. This isn't for fun. It's not even for escape. It's for entry. You join them. The taste is earthy, bitter, like biting into forest floor. They don't hit immediately, they never do, so you sit, legs crossed, hands on your knees, waiting. Listening to the fire, watching the trees, feeling your breath grow longer, your pulse slow down. And then it begins. First, the edges change. Leaves shimmer with colours that don't exist. The stones around the fire seem to pulse gently, like they're breathing with you. Someone begins to hum. Not a song exactly, more a tone. It vibrates in your ribs. You close your eyes and fall. Here's your historical fact. While psilocybin mushrooms are more often associated with Mesoamerican cultures, there is growing evidence that various kinds of psychoactive fungi were known and used in early European and Eurasian traditions. The medieval period, with all its superstition, suppression and spiritual hunger, had underground threads that kept these practices alive in the margins, far from church bells and manor walls, forest cults, rural mystics, folk rites passed down in whispers. Most people never knew about them. That was the point. Your fringe fact. There are accounts, buried deep in folk records, of rituals involving fairy mushrooms, or elf caps, which, when consumed during certain lunar phases, were said to open the veil between worlds. Participants reported seeing spirits, speaking with ancestors, or becoming animals in their visions. Some claim the mushrooms helped them find lost objects. Others said they never returned the same. And here's the debate. Did these hidden rituals persist in spite of the church, or because of it? Some scholars argue that as formal religion tightened its grip, people sought alternative ways to connect with the unseen, nature-based, personal and unsupervised. Others think these experiences were simply chalked up to madness or possession. After all, if a woman in a village said she became a wolf under a full moon, the priest would probably not take notes. He'd fetch kindling. But here, under the forest canopy, no one doubts. Your vision unfolds like a tapestry. You're walking through a landscape stitched from memory and dream. Trees speak in symbols. Water flows backward. A stag watches you with human eyes. You touch a stone, and it becomes warm as flesh. Time folds inward. You forget your name. Then remember one you've never heard before. You understand everything for a heartbeat. Then it slips away, laughing. One of the others begins to cry soundlessly. Another rocks gently, murmuring to the fire in a language that tastes like mint and rust. You feel no fear, just awe, like you've stepped into the lungs of the earth and it's letting you stay, briefly. Later, much later, you lie on your back in the moss staring up at stars so bright they look carved. The fire has burned down to glowing teeth. The circle of travellers is scattered now, some asleep, some still drifting. You're back in your body, but not completely. You can feel the thread between you and the forest. It's real now. Tug it, and something tugs back. You sit up slowly, the moss damp beneath your palms. There's no epiphany, no divine voice, just a quiet understanding, low and heavy in your gut. There is more. Always has been. The world isn't flat or finished. It breathes, it waits. And sometimes, when the right mix of night, silence and mushroom lines up just right, you get to see under the skin of things. You won't write this down. You won't speak of it. That's not how this works. You'll carry it like a pebble in your pocket, heavy when it needs to be, forgotten when it doesn't. And as you walk back through the forest, feet soft on soil, dawn warming the edges of the leaves, you know that this too was a kind of medicine, a kind of rebellion, a way to get high without ever leaving the ground. You're sitting on cold stone now, inside a vaulted chamber that hums with power and tension. This isn't a quiet apothecary or a mossy forest. This is where the big decisions are made. Banners line the walls, and the faint light of stained glass paints red and blue patterns across the floor like spilled wine and bruises. You've found yourself in the halls of power, specifically somewhere beneath them, a place where incense burns a little too sweet and the Latin chants echo a little too long. Welcome to the uneasy marriage between altered states and medieval politics. You're in the presence of the church. A cardinal stands at the head of the room, robes draped around him like a curtain about to be drawn. He's not preaching, he's watching. Across from him, a young man kneels with a pipe in his lap, not the kind for music. A long, narrow stem attached to a small bowl of packed herbs smouldering slowly. It's not official. It's not even sanctioned. But no one's stopping it. And just like that you realise the church didn't always say no. Not entirely. Not when it suited them. Here's your historical fact. The medieval church had a complex, often contradictory relationship with altered states. On one hand, it condemned intoxication, drunkenness, indulgence, losing control of the self. But on the other hand, visions, trances, ecstatic prophecy and divine possession, those were often embraced if they came from the right people, in the right context. Saints who fasted and hallucinated angels were praised. Mystics who saw Christ in their dreams were canonized. But a woman with a headache who drank poppy wine and claimed to speak with the Virgin, she was suspect. The pipe being used now is filled with a mixture of herbs, some calming, some focusing, some imported from far-off markets in Alexandria and Damascus. It's said to open the mind for contemplation. A few bishops privately support its use, others whisper that it's too close to sorcery, but it's here, in the chamber, smoked in silence, under the painted eyes of saints and martyrs. Here's your fringe fact. There are records of early Christian mystics using aromatic resins, like frankincense and myrrh, not just in rituals, but in high concentrations in private prayer spaces. When burned in excess or in enclosed rooms, these substances could produce mild psychoactive effects: headiness, time distortion, dissociation. Some historians believe they were used intentionally, to deepen prayer, to quiet the senses, to simulate a divine presence. Not unlike what incense does today, just turned up to 11. And the debate? Oh, it's a big one. Scholars continue to argue, was the church genuinely promoting spiritual transcendence? Or was it drawing strict lines between divine experience and heretical intoxication? Why were some people allowed to speak in tongues and others silenced for the same? The answer lies somewhere in the smoke, murky, changing shape with every gust of political wind. Back in the chamber, the young man exhales, slowly, deliberately. The room fills with a thin haze and you swear, just for a second, the stained glass pulses. The cardinal nods, not approval, but understanding. He's seen this before. A tool, not a toy. A method, not a rebellion. You sit quietly on the edge, the scent of the herbs wrapping around you like soft fabric. You try to imagine what this would have felt like centuries ago, when you didn't know how your body worked, didn't know the word neurology, didn't even have a word for hallucination, only spirit, only grace, only sin. Every flicker of vision was either a miracle or a danger, and maybe that's the heart of it. The church didn't hate altered states. It feared what they couldn't control. A peasant woman with a vision? A problem. A nobleman's daughter hearing voices? Dangerous. But a monk, eyes wide after days without food, claiming he saw the Virgin Mary bathe in golden light. That was page 1 of the next sermon. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the scent settle in. You hear whispers, not voices exactly, more like impressions. Thought fragments that don't belong to you, Latin phrases, wind chimes, the sound of wings. You open your eyes again. Everything's normal. But for a second, you believed. And so did they. The church might have worn the robes of rationality, but beneath them the fabric was woven with mystery. From incense-thick cathedrals to candle-lit confessionals, altered states were never far away. They just had to be dressed up properly, named, framed, painted into frescoes. As the young man finishes his prayer, he places the pipe down on the stone floor. No one speaks. The cardinal blesses him, quick and silent, then turns to leave. The others follow, robes rustling, sandals scuffing the floor. You stay a moment longer, watching the final threads of smoke rise toward the vaulted ceiling, where painted angels look down, serene and slightly amused. You step out into the hallway, and the cold hits you like a bell ringing inside your ribs. Behind you, the door closes. The church has always walked a fine line, between devotion and control, ecstasy and doctrine. And tonight you saw just how blurry that line really was. Sometimes salvation came in silence. Sometimes it came with smoke. You're surrounded by buzzing. Not the metaphorical kind. Actual buzzing. Thick and heavy in the air like a chant sung by 1,000 tiny voices. The sun is sharp overhead, and you're standing in the middle of a wildflower field that pulses with colour and motion. Bees move like currents all around you, dipping into blossoms, darting back toward a cluster of woven hives stacked beneath an overhang of rock and tree. The beekeeper nearby, shirt loose, hand steady, moves among them without fear like he's part of the swarm. You're here for honey, yes, but not the kind you drizzle onto bread. This honey is darker, stickier, stronger. He calls it mad honey, and the name isn't poetic. He opens one of the hives carefully, lifting a slatted frame heavy with gold and amber glistening in the sun. This batch, he says, eyes narrowed, comes from the rhododendrons. And then he grins. Not mischievous, not wicked, just aware. You're about to taste something that blurs lines. Mad honey is real, and here's your historical fact. In regions along the Black Sea, particularly in parts of what is now Turkey and the Caucasus, bees that fed on specific types of rhododendron blossoms produced honey containing grayonotoxin, a neurotoxin that could cause euphoria, dizziness, hallucinations, and, in higher doses, vomiting, paralysis, and death. Ancient texts mention this strange honey as early as 401 BCE, when soldiers in Xenophon's army consumed it and became disoriented, stumbling, laughing, and vomiting their way through a particularly dismal stretch of marching. The man offers you a small wooden spoon with a dab of the dark honey. You hesitate, then taste. It's strange, metallic, floral, like perfume melting in your mouth. Immediately you feel something shift in your gut. Not pain, not even warmth, just an awareness. Your body pays attention. The beekeeper tells you he uses it sparingly, for ritual, not for sweetness. Sometimes a spoonful before prayer, sometimes to help with the pain in his knees. Sometimes, he says, when he needs to remember something he's not sure actually happened. Mad honey makes memory feel more like truth, he explains, as if that clarifies anything. Here's your fringe fact. Some warriors in ancient and medieval times were said to have used mad honey before battle, not to sharpen their senses, but to dull fear, to enter a state where pain didn't matter. In the wrong dose, it made them stumble and collapse. In the right dose, it made them unstoppable. So they claimed. High enough to run straight into swords without blinking. You sit in the grass, watching the world pulse and sway ever so slightly. The flowers lean toward you, or maybe the breeze is just stronger now. The bees buzz louder, or closer. Time feels thick. Your skin is cool, even in the sun, and your fingers seem to move independently of your will, like they're conducting an invisible orchestra of breath and shadow. The debate among scholars, of course, is how much of this was intentional. Did medieval beekeepers really cultivate hallucinogenic honey on purpose? Or did they simply recognize the patterns, Some batches made you sleep like a stone, others made you see music. Were the effects desired, or just tolerated? There's evidence of trade in these kinds of honeys. Jarred, labelled with symbols rather than words, passed between healers and mystics who knew how to use them with care. But there are also stories of poor farmers using it recreationally, or out of boredom, or for revenge. One tale tells of a feast where a lord's enemies were served spiced bread soaked in mad honey. By dessert, they were crawling under tables, swearing the candles were talking to them. Whether that story's true or not, hard to say, but you can picture it. And here you are, lying in the grass with bees buzzing overhead, and your brain slowly shifting sideways like a cart with a broken wheel. You close your eyes. The darkness behind your eyelids isn't quiet. It blooms with colour and pattern. Flashes of gold. Voices like wind over glass. The vague sense of laughter from someone you haven't seen in years. You're not afraid. The honey doesn't bring fear, just strangeness. The rules of reality gently loosened, like laces untied. When you sit up again, it's dusk. The beekeeper is still there, sorting his tools, his motion steady and slow. You feel soft, not sleepy, but weightless. You speak, but your voice doesn't quite sound like yours. It's rounder, slower. He nods, like he's seen this 1,000 times. It passes, he says. You'll feel clearer by morning. Don't walk near the river just yet. You want to ask why, but you don't. Some things don't need answers. Instead, you lie back down and let the sky turn indigo above you. Stars pricking through the blue like tiny pinholes in the dome of the world. The bees have gone quiet. The wind has softened, and in the soft, lingering edge of the high, you think maybe this is what prophecy feels like. Not booming voices or lightning from heaven, just knowing. A nudge, a shift in how things make sense. The honey hums in your blood, and the world holds its breath. You're in a stone hall now, long and draughty, lit with sputtering torches that throw more shadow than light. The walls are hung with faded tapestries, hunts, battles, saints whose eyes follow you just a little too long. The air smells like grease and smoke, and someone's idea of perfume, which in this case seems to be an entire lavender bush dunked in goat fat. At the far end of the room, musicians saw away at fiddles and pipes, their tune manic and uneven, as if they've been forced to play far past their comfort zone. And dancing in front of them, in the middle of the great hall, is a man in a jester's outfit, shrieking laughter spilling out of him like coins from a broken purse. You've landed in a noble court, and things are getting weird. The jester flings himself into a somersault, lands with a wobble, and immediately starts impersonating a bishop mid-sermon, complete with fake incense and exaggerated hiccuping. The nobles roar with laughter. A baron's wife nearly chokes on a grape. Even the steward cracks a smile. But you? You're watching the jester's eyes, and they're not laughing. They're glassy. Here's your historical fact. Jesters and fools were essential parts of many medieval courts, not just for entertainment, but as sanctioned truth speakers. They were allowed, even expected, to mock the lords, tease the church, and speak in riddles about things no one else dared name. But to perform that role night after night required more than just wit. It required insulation, something to take the edge off. And that's where fermented fun came in. Wine laced with herbs, mead with additives, even early distilled liquors. Fiery, bracing, often inconsistent. The court jester might start his evening sober, but he'd rarely end that way. Sometimes it was encouraged. Liquid courage helped him go further with his jokes. Other times it was survival. To play the fool, you had to stop caring if your audience could have your head cut off. Your fringe fact. Some jesters are rumoured to have used stronger substances, opium tinctures, cannabis paste, or even dream brews stolen from apothecaries. Not just to dull the pressure, but to fuel the act. Imagine a man high enough to believe he's talking to angels, then turning that into a punchline about the Duke's latest haircut. Genius or madness? Both, probably. Now for the scholarly debate. Were these court entertainers just victims of a role imposed on them, using mind-altering substances to cope? Or were they early experimenters in performance-enhancing highs, harnessing altered states to boost creativity, spontaneity, and boldness? Some records suggest jesters were far more self-aware than people gave them credit for. They used substances not to forget themselves, but to become more themselves, louder, stranger, untouchable. Back in the great hall, the jester leaps into a chair and begins singing in falsetto about the king's backside. The crowd howls. A servant discreetly places another cup by his side, clear liquid, strong enough to sting your eyes from here. He drains it mid-verse and tosses the cup behind him without missing a beat. You glance at the musicians. One of them is swaying, eyes glazed. This whole performance feels less like a play and more like a shared hallucination. And it works, because for a few hours the lords and ladies forget the politics, the alliances, the slow rot of aging estates. They laugh, they cry, they let themselves be mocked. It's a collective high, driven by drink and noise and the energy of a man who may or may not even remember his own name by the end of the night. You slip out of the hall and find the jester later, crouched by a pillar, head in his hands. His bells are silent now. His voice is hoarse. He holds a flask in one hand and a strip of parchment in the other. Something he's written, maybe, or just stared at until the ink stopped making sense. You sit beside him without speaking. He doesn't look up. "They think I'm blessed," he mutters. "To say what they can't, but it's not a blessing. It's a mask, and masks get heavy." You offer him water. He declines, then laughs. "Next court, I'm pretending to be a priest possessed by demons. They'll love it." You stay until he sleeps, or passes out. Hard to say. The truth is, jesters weren't fools. They were just the ones willing to say the world was mad, and act accordingly. If that meant a little help from fermented fruit, so be it. If that meant chasing visions and hallucinations and dreams laced with rosemary wine, so be it. Better a laughing madman than a weeping one. And as you walk away, past nobles sprawled on cushions and servants cleaning up spilled ale with bread, you wonder how many other truths were only ever told by people too high to care about the consequences. Maybe that's the lesson. In a world built on silence, it's the fool, wild-eyed and wine-drunk who gets to speak. You're standing in a room with no clocks, no sun, no clear direction. It's round, or maybe square. Hard to tell. The walls are blank, but somehow oppressive, like they've been staring at you longer than you've been looking at them. There's a candle burning low on a table, the wax pooling in slow motion, dripping without urgency. Around you, people move like they've just woken up, or never quite went to sleep. Someone stares at the flame as if it's speaking. Another scribbles numbers onto parchment, then crosses them out, muttering. No one seems entirely sure what day it is, or hour, or frankly, what century. Welcome to the strange high of losing time. You've stepped into one of the strangest altered states medieval people encountered. Temporal distortion. Not through herbs or potions this time, but through confusion, isolation, spiritual obsession, and the occasional calendar blunder. You might think of time as a fixed logical system. They didn't. Time, in the Middle Ages, was both sacred and slippery, and sometimes people just forgot it. Here's your historical fact. During the medieval period, timekeeping was inconsistent at best. Villages used church bells to mark the canonical hours, matins, lauds, prime, and so on, but the actual lengths of these hours varied with the seasons. Summer hours stretched, winter hours shrank. Some monks used sundials, others used water clocks, some relied entirely on the position of the sun. It wasn't until the invention of mechanical clocks in the 14th century that hours started meaning what they do today. Before that, it was a guess, a suggestion, a vibe. You sit down on a stool watching a woman turn over an hourglass repeatedly, even though no sand is left. She looks exhausted. Her hands are ink-stained, her eyes puffy from weeping or lack of sleep, possibly both. She's been copying scripture or recording dreams or charting visions that don't follow any logical structure. Every once in a while she pauses and blinks like she's just remembered she has a body. And this isn't rare. Here's your fringe fact. There were recorded cases, mostly in monastic or hermitic settings, of individuals claiming to have lost entire days in prayer or meditation. Some thought they'd slept a night only to find a week had passed. Others claimed they had lived lifetimes within a single dream. Whether caused by malnutrition, spiritual fasting, sensory deprivation, or plain exhaustion, these episodes often carried profound spiritual significance. They weren't feared, they were revered, even stranger. Some mystics described time folding during ecstatic states, seeing the past and future at once, or stepping briefly outside the linear flow of events. Catherine of Siena once claimed that time in heaven and time on earth moved differently, and that her soul had glimpsed all moments together like stars on a cloth. Is that poetry? Prophecy? Or just someone whose brain hasn't touched a carbohydrate in 4 days? Now for the scholarly debate. Were these moments of temporal dislocation religious, psychological, or neurological? Historians argue over whether medieval people literally experienced these time lapses or simply interpreted normal mental fog through a lens of spiritual symbolism. Some theorists point to altered states induced by sensory monotony, chanting the same prayer for hours, staring at candlelight, fasting for weeks as likely causes. Others argue that, lacking a consistent timekeeping system, people simply didn't notice time passing in the way we obsess over now. And you're starting to feel it. There's no window in this room. The candle is lower now. The air hasn't changed, but you swear your skin feels different, like it's older, or new, or both. You're not sure how long you've been sitting here. Minutes? Hours? Something about the flickering flame and the quiet scratching of quill on parchment creates a trance. Your mind loosens, unwinds, and then loses track of its own thread. You try to stand. Your knees argue. Someone beside you is praying in a whisper that loops the same sentence over and over. Another is sketching spirals on the stone floor, eyes wide, smiling slightly. No one tells them to stop. There's no wrong way to be in this room. The distortion is the point. You remember stories now, of saints who sat in one place for days, unmoving, until someone shook them awake and found their face radiant with light. Of hermits in caves who believed a blink was a century. Of mystics who marked their visions not in hours or days but in moments of fire. You understand them more now than you thought you would. When you finally leave, the world feels brighter and louder, like someone turned the contrast up too high. A rooster crows, though you don't know if it's morning or evening. A bell rings, but you can't tell which prayer it's for. The sun sits low in the sky, rising or setting, who knows, and you realise something strange. Being high on a plant, a brew, a potion, that's one kind of experience. But being high on confusion, that's a whole other level. Not every altered state came from herbs or smoke. Sometimes it came from silence, repetition, too much God, and not enough sleep. And in the Middle Ages, where certainty was rare and time was optional, slipping out of your own timeline wasn't just possible, it was expected. You exhale slowly, your breath fogs in the cool air, you have no idea what time it is, and for once it doesn't matter. You're crouched in a dim, narrow chamber now, half kitchen, half laboratory, with an air of secret soaked into the stone walls. It's warmer than it should be, with a sharp scent of alcohol clinging to everything. Bitter, metallic, almost sweet, but not in a comforting way. The shelves are lined with earthenware jugs, dried herbs in bundles, and mysterious unlabelled bottles plugged with wax or rags. This is the still room, a space hidden in the back of the manor or beneath the cloisters, or even tucked behind a village herb wife's hut. If the rest of the world is a heavy, mud-smeared scroll, this is the margin where magic is scrawled in tiny, careful ink. You're here for the spirits, Not the ghostly kind, the drinkable ones. The kind that burn going down and blur the lines between medicine, mysticism and mayhem. You're watching a woman tend to a copper still, the kind shaped like a sleeping goose. Her sleeves are rolled, her fingers stained, and her expression utterly focused as she monitors the bubbling liquid. It hisses, steams and condenses in thin rivulets that drip into a bowl with quiet precision. This isn't a tavern operation. This is something older, slower, and if you ask her what she's making, she'll say aqua vitae, the water of life. Here's your historical fact. Early distillation became more widespread in Europe during the 12th and 13th centuries, partly due to translations of Arabic alchemical texts. Initially used in alchemy and medicine, distilled alcohol was believed to hold the essence of a substance, its spirit. Apothecaries, monks, and learned women alike experimented with extracting the healing properties of plants using strong alcohol as a base, believing it could preserve vitality, prolong life, or at the very least make unbearable ailments slightly less unbearable. The earliest alcohols weren't for toasting weddings or drowning your sorrows. They were infusions, elixirs, tinctures meant for the sick, the dying, and those staring too long at the edge of the world. And here's your fringe fact. In some isolated communities, the stillroom was also a space of experimentation, not just with healing, but with prophecy. Women, often midwives or wise wives, distilled concoctions that were said to bring on visions, dreams, or strange moments of insight. A draught of rosemary-steeped spirits at midnight, a drop of wormwood and lavender under the tongue during a storm. Not enough to kill, but enough to soften the membrane between this world and the next. Some claimed it let them see a future birth. Others saw death coming. A few saw stars falling through the floor. Now, scholars like to debate whether this use of early liquor was intentional mysticism or just a side effect of experimentation. The problem is the records are incomplete. Most stillroom texts were practical, measurements, ingredients, effects. But between the lines you get hints, opens the mind, loosens the tongue, calms the night wanderings, terms that don't show up in church-sanctioned pharmacopoeia. Still, where language softens, secrets usually bloom. Back in the room, the distiller hands you a small cup, clay, warm, filled with a cloudy amber liquid. You hesitate. The scent is like pepper, mint, and rain-soaked stone. You sip. It kicks like a mule. Your mouth burns. Your eyes water. But beneath the sting, you feel something strange. A clarity. Not like sobering up, but like tuning in. As if the stillroom's shadows are sharpening, revealing faces in the flickering candlelight you didn't see before. The dried herbs above you rustle, not from wind. The copper still hisses with a sigh that sounds suspiciously like a name you once knew. You blink. It's just the fumes. Probably. You sit. Or maybe you didn't mean to, but the stool is under you now. The warmth from the drink spreads through your ribs. Not comfort exactly, but an expansion. Your thoughts feel less like sentences and more like vines creeping into corners you'd sealed shut. Someone across the room whispers, but no one's there. It's not a trip. Not the wild hallucination of mushroom nights or ergot-stained bread. It's subtler. A low hum in the bones. A gentle tilt in perspective. The distiller watches you with knowing eyes. Not judgmental, not amused, just patient. It's different for everyone, she murmurs. Depends what you bring into the still with you. You wonder now how many women passed down these recipes not to cure, but to teach. To remind their daughters that the world wasn't always what it seemed, and sometimes, to understand it better, you had to drink something that tasted like mistakes and see what truths floated to the top. The fire crackles lower now and the bottle is corked. Your vision steadies. Your hands stop trembling. But something inside you remains unstuck. A little off-centre. Like a compass that spins and finally lands on a direction you didn't know existed. The distiller says nothing more. She doesn't need to. You've seen enough tonight to understand that the still room wasn't just a place of healing, it was a place of transformation, a laboratory of the liminal, a sanctuary where a quiet mind and a hot fire could make something more than medicine. As you step back into the cold night, your breath curls in the air like steam from the still. You taste rosemary on your tongue. You hear nothing, but feel everything. And somewhere deep inside you, the water of life is still burning. You're in a room that smells like secrets. Not rot, not incense. Something more surgical. Sharp. Cold. Like dried mint mixed with rusted metal. The shelves are lined with jars of powders, pickled roots, and animal parts you don't want to identify. The windows are shuttered, and the only light comes from a pair of low-burning candles, flickering against the worn stone walls. In front of you is a man. Not a priest, not a noble, and definitely not a peasant. He's dressed in a long coat, tied tightly at the waist, his hands stained and his nails clean. He's an apothecary, and the line between him and a sorcerer is about 3 drops of belladonna and an accusation away. You watch him measure crushed violet petals into a small brass scale, then tip the powder into a vial already half filled with a bubbling greenish liquid. His movements are precise, methodical. The man is crafting something between medicine and mystery, and he isn't looking for approval, least of all from the church. He stops briefly to glance at a page covered in cramped Latin, makes a correction with a charcoal stick and resumes mixing. He doesn't speak, but you can feel it in the air. This man knows things he shouldn't. Here's your historical fact. Medieval apothecaries were essential but deeply mistrusted. They prepared remedies, some of which genuinely helped people. Treatments for fever, wounds, nightmares, coughs. But they also dabbled in experimentation. They were pharmacists, yes, but also chemists, herbalists, and, when necessary, quiet conspirators. With knowledge passed down from ancient Greek, Roman, and Arabic texts, apothecaries often held more practical medical skill than most doctors, though they lacked the title and the legal safety that came with it. Many of their concoctions were based on real principles: distillation, solubility, fermentation, but others drifted into the grey, into cures that involved mercury, or powdered emeralds, or dried fox lung mixed with goat bile. Some swore these worked, some probably did, others just made you too dizzy to complain. Your fringe fact tonight: in certain towns, particularly across Central and Eastern Europe, some apothecaries began to gain reputations as dream brokers. For a price, they could mix you a night elixir, a syrup or powder that would help you sleep, yes, but also help you see. Not just dreams, but answers, symbols, visitations. People paid to see dead lovers, gods, answers to impossible questions. Were the ingredients herbal? Usually. Did they work? Sometimes. But the experience was often so intense, so vivid, that even if it was pure placebo, it still left a mark. You sit down across from the apothecary. He hands you a cup. Ceramic. Simple. Stained. The mixture inside glows faintly amber under the candlelight. It smells like cloves, honey, and something faintly acidic, like the air before a lightning storm. He doesn't tell you what's in it. You're not here to understand it. You're here to take it. And you do. It slides down your throat like syrup, sticky and warm. At first, nothing. Then a tingling behind your eyes. Then heat blooming in your chest. The candlelight shifts. It's subtle, like the shadows are leaning in to listen. The apothecary keeps writing as if you're not here, as if your transformation is no more remarkable than boiling water. You blink, and the letters on his parchment seem to lift slightly, curling upward like steam. You lean back and drift. This isn't a trip, it's a descent. You fall, not physically but inward, folding into yourself like a book snapping shut. You hear your own heartbeat as if it's coming from the other side of the room. Time slows to a crawl. You see flashes of colour behind your eyelids. Not bright, not overwhelming. Just shapes moving in deliberate procession, like stained glass windows come to life. And then, a voice. It doesn't say anything you understand, but it's familiar. The apothecary is still writing when you come back. He doesn't ask what you saw. He doesn't need to. He's seen enough eyes like yours, dazed, a little wet, searching for something they can't quite explain. Here's the debate that keeps historians up at night. Were apothecaries performing science or sorcery? And more importantly, did they know the difference? Some scholars argue that the apothecary's work laid the foundation for modern pharmacology. Others insist they were simply the last remnants of a pre-Christian magical worldview. 1 foot in the natural, 1 foot in the supernatural, both soaked in wine tincture and wrapped in beeswax. You stand shaky. The apothecary nods once and opens the door. The air outside feels heavier, colder, like you've been gone longer than you realised. You feel a strange awareness in your limbs, like your blood is still adjusting. You try to remember the exact flavour of what you drank. You can't. But you'll never forget the way it felt. You walk away from the stone building, glancing back only once. The window is dark now. No candle, as if the whole place collapsed into smoke the moment you left. And you wonder, not for the first time, if the apothecary was a healer, a prophet, or just a very talented liar with a cabinet full of potions that made people believe. Then again, maybe all three were the same job. You're walking through the chill breath of early dawn, boots crunching on frost-laced grass, the sky still bruised with the fading colours of night. There's a hush to the world. No birds yet, no bells, not even the whisper of distant carts. Just silence, and the feeling that something important has either just happened or is about to. You're approaching the edge of a field, not farmland, but open land, sacred in the local way. A grove of trees forms a half circle at the far end, with stones nestled among their roots like sleeping animals. And in the middle, shrouded in fog, stand figures in pale robes, barely moving, as if carved from the mist itself. You've come to witness one of the older rites, the kind with no name, because names make things easier to punish. These aren't druids. Those are long gone, or buried under too much Roman rewriting. These aren't Christians either, though 1 or 2 of them wear crosses. This is the in-between, where old customs and new beliefs sleep in the same bed and pretend not to notice each other. The ritual about to unfold is less a spell and more a loosening. A seasonal rite, timed to the equinox, or maybe a moon, or maybe just a feeling. And while you won't find it in any church record, you'll find echoes of it in the way your spine tingles, in the way these people breathe in unison, in what they're about to drink. The cup is passed now, simple wood smoothed by many hands. Inside is a thick, dark brew, made from ingredients that shift depending on who's making it, but usually include wormwood, mugwort, maybe mandrake if someone's been bold, and honey. Always honey. You recognise it as a kind of proto-absinthe, though no one here calls it that. They don't need to. They just call it the drink, or the green, or the breath. Here's your historical fact. Long before absinthe became the darling of 19th century artists, its bitter backbone, Artemisia absinthium, or wormwood, was already known and used in medieval Europe. It was praised for its medicinal qualities, especially in easing stomach pain and killing parasites. But in higher doses and certain preparations, it was also believed to stimulate vivid dreams, hallucinations, and even temporary possession. Monks included it in herbal texts, often with warnings. Folk healers used it more freely. As the cup passes into your hands, you take in the smell, bitter, herby, laced with something sharp and electric beneath the sweetness. You drink. It hits the tongue like a slap, cool, metallic, then suddenly hot as it slides down. It tastes like regret, like moss, like something green trying to crawl back to life inside you. And almost immediately the trees start to breathe. Not literally, probably, but they pulse, sway, even though the wind hasn't moved. You feel a tug behind your ribs, like something is being drawn up from the ground through your feet. One of the robed figures begins to hum. Another joins. The sound builds slowly, like water in a pot that doesn't boil but begins to shimmer. Your vision sharpens in places and blurs in others. The sky goes pink, then green, then back again, and you feel yourself detach, just slightly, from your name. Here's your fringe fact. In certain rural parts of medieval Europe, especially in regions bordering Slavic and Baltic cultures, spring and autumn festivals included the ritual ingestion of bitter, herbal liqueurs. These weren't celebratory drinks. They were taken in small, deliberate sips, believed to allow communion with the land, the dead, or the seasonal spirits that walked during the thin times of year. Women led many of these rites, and in more than one record, men who participated reported vivid visions of ancestors, animal transformations, and even temporary blindness followed by a feeling of seeing backwards. The scholarly debate around this is fierce. Were these visions induced by known psychoactive agents, or by the collective psychological effect of ritual, fasting, and suggestion? Some argue these ceremonies were exaggerated by later folklorists eager to find pagan remnants under every rock. Others say the consistency across isolated accounts suggests a shared experience of altered consciousness that defies easy explanation. You don't have time to decide because someone nearby begins to speak. Not loudly, not clearly, but with such conviction that it freezes the fog in place. She's describing something. A path, a light, a name she's never heard before but swears she's known for centuries. A man beside her begins to sway, tears running down his face. Another lies flat on the ground, eyes open, lips moving silently. And you feel transparent. Not gone, but not fully here either. The drink hasn't taken you on a journey. It's peeled back a layer. The field feels fuller, thicker, more alive than it did before. And not in a pretty way. It's not a forest sprite moment. This is older. This is bone deep. The land remembers things. And now, because you drank the drink, it remembers you. The cup makes its way back to the centre. The humming quiets. No one says, "We're done," but it's over. Or the part that needed to be witnessed is. The fog begins to burn off in the rising sun. You look at your hands. They're yours, mostly. And as you leave the grove, boots damp with dew, head buzzing with something too big for thought, you understand what they've always known. Getting high wasn't just about leaving your body. Sometimes it was about stepping more deeply into it. Feeling where you end and the world begins, and realizing that line moves more than we're comfortable admitting. You're somewhere between waking and sleep now, walking along a narrow road lit only by the stars. The moon is a thin, silver slice above you, and the trees stretch up on either side like cathedral walls, their branches knitting overhead into a vaulted ceiling of leaves. The path is muddy underfoot but quiet, and you've been following it long enough that you've forgotten where it started, or if it started at all. Ahead, a small figure stumbles in the dark, clutching their head and groaning. You hurry forward, the instinct to help rising unbidden, but when you reach them, the smell hits you first. Sour, earthy, and unmistakable. They're hungover, badly. One eye half closed, face pale as ash, they lean against a tree with a half-eaten sprig of parsley dangling from their mouth like a dead vine. This is the morning after in medieval fashion. Less about regret and more about sheer survival. You sit beside them, not close enough to threaten, but near enough to offer a water skin. They take it greedily, sloshing more onto their chest than into their mouth. Their fingers tremble, their tunic is stained, and still, somewhere in their dazed mumbling you catch it, the word blessed, as in, last night I was blessed. They mean high, absolutely, unapologetically high, and now they're cursed with the crash. Here's your historical fact. Hangovers in the Middle Ages were not just common, they were brutal. Without any real understanding of dehydration, electrolyte loss or alcohol toxicity, people turned to an array of remedies, most of them bizarre, some of them borderline dangerous. There was no Tylenol, no greasy breakfast sandwich. Instead, the average medieval hangover cure might include crushed ivy leaves, raw eel, pickled cabbage, or wine mixed with ashes of burnt goat horns. Yes, goat horns. Your new friend, groaning on the forest floor, seems to favour the parsley method. That was one of the gentler cures, believed to settle the stomach and cool the blood. Others swore by vinegar-soaked bread or a concoction made of warm beer, raw egg and a dash of salt. And if that didn't work, well, hair of the dog, literally. Some believed placing a hair from the animal you drank with, yes, sometimes animals were involved in toasts, into your wine would cancel out the effects. You consider asking them if they tried this, but they're still dry heaving too hard to answer. Here's your fringe fact. There's one particularly odd remedy mentioned in a handful of monastic herbals from the 13th and 14th centuries, a mixture called Angel's Brew, made from mashed fig, thyme, rosewater, and, of all things, ashes from holy parchment. That's right. Old damaged scrolls with fragments of prayers were sometimes scraped and burned, and their ashes added to concoctions intended to purify the body after excess. Whether this was medicinal or symbolic is unclear. Maybe both. Maybe neither. But the implication is there. You sinned through indulgence, and now you're drinking holiness to purge it. The scholarly debate, of course, is how seriously these treatments were taken. Were they scientific attempts at balance using the humoral system, trying to cool the hot, drunk body? Or were they spiritual rituals disguised as medicine? Some argue that the hangover was seen less as a physical consequence and more as a moral punishment, the body's rebellion against too much pleasure. Others point out that many of the people using these cures had no access to theology. They just wanted to stop vomiting in a field. You sit quietly as your new companion's breathing slows. The birds are starting to chirp now, and light filters through the trees in pale ribbons. They sit up slowly, holding their head like it might detach. "Do you know what was in that drink?" they ask. You don't. It could have been mead, could have been spiced wine with wormwood, could have been one of those herbal brews meant to bring visions but mixed too strong, brewed too long. Either way it did its job, dragged them out of their mind and dropped them back here, sore and sorry and blinking at the sunrise. And yet they don't seem angry, just humbled. Like someone who touched the divine by accident and then hit every branch on the way back down. You help them to their feet, they wobble. You offer your shoulder, they take it. The road ahead isn't any clearer, but it feels lighter somehow. The fog is lifting. A village bell rings faintly in the distance. Somewhere someone's baking bread. Somewhere someone else is boiling a pot of something awful and calling it a cure. Life returns, slowly and clumsily as it always does. As you walk together, your companion begins recounting fragments of the night. There was a stag, or a man with antlers. I asked him a question, but I don't remember what. I think he laughed. You nod. These stories rarely make sense. That's not the point. The point is they saw something, felt something. That's the trade. Clarity for chaos. A moment of divine nonsense paid for in headaches and regret. You reach the edge of a small hamlet as the sun breaks fully over the hills. The fields glow gold. The roofs glisten with dew. Children chase chickens. Life goes on, blissfully unaware of whatever cosmic nonsense unfolded in the woods a few hours ago. You both pause, no big farewell, just a glance, a nod, and then you part, because highs end, visions fade, but what lingers is the echo, that quiet little voice in your bones that says, you touch something real, even if you don't understand it. And as you make your way toward the nearest hearth and maybe a bowl of cabbage soup with too much salt, you realise the most human part of getting high in the Middle Ages wasn't the trip, it was the coming back. You're lying down now. Wherever you are, bed, couch, quiet floor with a blanket thrown over you, it doesn't really matter. You've walked through monasteries, fields, forests, and the back corners of smoky taverns. You've sipped strange brews in the dark, met saints and fools, and stared down a few questionable mushrooms while wondering whether your dreams were real or just really vivid indigestion. Congratulations. You've survived medieval highs. Barely. You probably need a nap. It's easy to think of the Middle Ages as a place of hard rules and stiff collars, dirt, plague, prayer, repeat. But underneath all that grim imagery was a deeply human curiosity about what lies beyond the veil of the ordinary. People weren't just trying to escape their muddy lives, they were trying to understand them, sometimes through prayer, sometimes through fermented honey, sometimes through rubbing poisonous ointments on their thighs and swearing they could fly. And who are we to say they didn't? The boundary between medicine and magic, hallucination and revelation, wasn't nearly as solid as we think it is now. The line blurred constantly. It had to blur. When your world was ruled by unseen forces, and your options for fun were bread, war, or wine, you'd probably get creative too. A little wormwood in your cup, a few mushrooms in your stew, a whispered spell from your grandmother's grandmother. Not all of it worked. Some of it worked too well, but every single one of those strange little rituals, those dream brews and bitter tinctures, carried something deeper, the ancient urge to reach beyond the veil, to shake hands with mystery, even if it meant waking up face down in a puddle with a cabbage leaf on your forehead. So now, as you pull the blanket up a little higher and your eyelids get heavier, just remember, our ancestors weren't so different. They got high, they got weird, and most of the time they just wanted to feel something they couldn't explain. Same as us. Sleep easy, time traveller, you've earned it.